Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Eliza Montgomery. I'm a wildlife photographer, or at least I was until 6 months ago when everything fell apart. After my breakdown, my therapist suggested I needed space to heal, somewhere quiet, away from the pressures of deadlines and city life. When I learned my Uncle Franklin had left me his old desert homestead in his will, it felt like the universe was giving me a sign. The drive to the Mojave Desert property took nearly 5 hours from Las Vegas. As I followed the increasingly narrow roads, civilization gradually disappeared in my rearview mirror. By the time I reached the rusty gate marking the entrance to my uncle's land, the only company I had was the Joshua trees standing like silent sentinels against the vast blue sky. The house itself was modest, a single-story structure with a wraparound porch and windows that seemed to stare out at the emptiness. Behind it stood a small workshop where Uncle Franklin had spent most of his time. I remembered him as a quiet, intense man who always had grease under his fingernails and a distant look in his eyes. "This is perfect," I whispered, stepping out of my truck. The silence hit me immediately, not the artificial quiet of a city apartment, but a living stillness, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind through the desert scrub. I could already imagine the photographs I'd take for my book on desert ecology. What I didn't notice right away was the strange circular depression stretching out behind the property. It wasn't until I climbed onto the roof to check for damage that I saw it, a perfectly round basin, maybe a mile across, scooping gently downward like a shallow bowl pressed into the earth. That night, I tried using my phone's GPS to map the area, but the screen kept freezing, the little blue dot jumping erratically across the display. My compass wasn't any better, the needle spinning lazily in circles instead of pointing north. I shrugged it off as some kind of magnetic anomaly in the rocks. 3 days into unpacking, I found a dusty box of Uncle Franklin's papers in the back of a closet. Most of it was boring stuff. Bills, subscription magazines about science and astronomy. But underneath those was a leather-bound notebook filled with meticulous observations about what he called the shadow basin. Time distortion measured at 0.0034 seconds during sunset on March 15th, one entry read, increasing at consistent rate yearly. Another page held complex calculations and a crude map of the circular depression with points marked in red ink. Didn't understand most of it, but I recognized scientific note-taking when I saw it. Uncle Franklin had been measuring something out there, something about time acting strangely. I remembered him as eccentric, always tinkering with homemade gadgets, but this seemed different. In his workshop, I found strange equipment covered in dust. Metal boxes with dials, antennas pointed toward the basin, reel-to-reel recorders modified with additional parts I didn't recognize. A week after arriving, a beat-up pickup truck came rattling down my driveway. The man who stepped out introduced himself as Diego Vasquez. He was maybe 50, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of outdoor work. "Your uncle arranged for monthly deliveries," he explained, unloading boxes of supplies from his truck. "Paid up 2 years in advance before he passed. Figured you might want to continue the arrangement." I thanked him and offered coffee on the porch. As we sat watching the sun sink toward the basin, I asked about the strange circular depression. Diego's face tightened. "The locals call it the shadow basin. Best to leave it be, especially after dark." "Why's that?" I asked. He shrugged, but his eyes remained serious. Some things don't want their picture taken, Miss Montgomery. Your uncle understood that, eventually. Before leaving, Diego paused by his truck. "Stay in the house after sunset," he said, not quite looking at me. "Whatever you hear." After he left, I laughed off his warning as local superstition. I'd come here to photograph the desert after all. The next morning, I hiked into the basin with my camera equipment, setting up near a cluster of barrel cacti to photograph the desert wildlife. That's when I noticed the first strange thing. A pack of coyotes had gathered about 50 yards away, which wasn't unusual in itself. What struck me as odd was how they stood, perfectly still, 8 of them in a line, facing the center of the basin. They remained that way for over 3 hours, not moving, even when a hawk screamed overhead. 2 days later, I spotted jackrabbits arranged in what appeared to be a perfect triangle, motionless in the scrubland at dusk. Through my telephoto lens, I could see their eyes were open, bodies rigid, yet they seemed to be breathing. As darkness fell, they scattered suddenly, as if released from invisible strings. I told myself there must be a logical explanation. Perhaps it was a territorial display I wasn't familiar with, or a response to some predator I couldn't detect. The first time I noticed something wrong in the house was exactly 2 weeks after arriving. I'm methodical by nature, a trait that serves me well in photography. Each night before bed, I would line up my coffee mug on the kitchen counter, handle facing left, ready for morning. But that day, I found it rotated precisely 45 degrees clockwise. I might have dismissed it as forgetfulness, if not for the other things. My books on the shelf, which I always arranged alphabetically, had been reversed, Z to A. The photographs I'd hung were subtly tilted, all at identical angles. Most disturbing was finding nearly invisible thread stretched across the bathroom doorway at exactly my eye level. I began photographing the basin obsessively, especially during the golden hours of early morning and late afternoon, when the light was perfect. It was while reviewing these images on my laptop that I noticed something impossible. In 3 separate photographs, taken on different days but at the same time of evening, a figure appeared in the distance, impossibly tall and thin, standing motionless among the sagebrush. The figure was visible only from certain angles and in specific light conditions, as if it existed just at the edge of perception. When I zoomed in, the shape became less distinct rather than clearer, like a mirage dissolving under scrutiny. One afternoon, I discovered a box of old local newspapers in Uncle Franklin's office. Most were mundane, community events, weather, reports, obituaries, but I noticed a pattern in the missing person section. Every few years, always during a new moon, someone would vanish in the vicinity of Shadow Basin. Hikers, photographers, researchers, all gone without explanation. The most recent was dated just 2 months before my uncle's death. I set up my darkroom, equipment in an unused bathroom, carefully sealing the windows to prevent light leakage. As I developed my first batch of film, watching the images appear in the chemical bath, my hands began to shake. In the background of nearly every photograph taken in supposedly empty landscape were shapes, slender, elongated silhouettes watching. From behind rocks and cacti, they weren't visible to the naked eye, but the camera had somehow captured them. When Diego arrived with the next month's supplies, I showed him the photographs, his face drained of color. "Your uncle showed me similar pictures," he said quietly. Before what?" I demanded. "His heart attack?" Diego looked away. "There was no heart attack, Miss Montgomery. That's just what they put on the death certificate." He stared out toward the basin, now bathed in the orange glow of sunset. "The old tribes called them the Standing Ones. They say they exist in the spaces between moments, in the stillness." "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It means your uncle didn't die of natural causes," Diego said. "He was taken." The standing ones don't like being seen, being captured on film. But your uncle wouldn't stop. He kept photographing them, measuring them. He trespassed on their stillness time once too often. As if on cue, the sun slipped below the horizon, casting the basin in deep shadow. And in that moment, I felt rather than saw that we were being watched by something ancient and patient, something that had all the time in the world to wait. That night, I barely slept. Diego's words kept replaying in my mind. The standing ones, stillness time, taken. I told myself it was just superstition, the kind of story locals tell to scare outsiders. But the photographs in my darkroom told a different story. The first frozen moment happened 3 days later. I was in the kitchen, pouring my morning coffee, when everything just stopped. The coffee hung in midair between pot and cup, suspended as if time itself had paused. Dust particles floated motionless in the sunbeam coming through the window. The ticking of the clock on the wall fell silent. I could still move, still think, but the world around me had become a perfect photograph. A single instant stretched out impossibly. The silence pressed against my ears like physical weight. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. Coffee splashed into my cup, the clock resumed ticking, and everything was normal again, except for the metallic taste in my mouth, like I'd been sucking on pennies. And when I looked at my red coffee mug, I couldn't see its color. It appeared gray, as if my brain had temporarily lost the ability to process red. The color gradually returned over the next hour, but the experience left me deeply shaken. I started keeping track of these frozen moments in my own journal. They always lasted exactly 7 seconds, and they were happening more frequently. After each one, small things would be different around the house. A chair moved slightly, my toothbrush on the wrong side of the sink, windows that I'd closed found open. The new moon was approaching, and I noticed my uncle's equipment in the workshop beginning to stir. First it was just the lights on an old radio frequency meter blinking on by themselves. Then the needle on a gauge began to twitch rhythmically. By the third day, everything in the workshop had come alive. Dials spinning, lights flashing, a printer spitting out endless readings of radiation and electromagnetic spikes that made no sense to me. I found a hidden panel in Uncle Franklin's desk drawer. Inside was a small notebook bound in black leather, the pages filled with his increasingly frantic handwriting. He called them the Thin Ones, entities that existed primarily in the moments between seconds. According to his notes, they lived in the pauses between human perception, in the blinks and breath spaces where our attention falters. They are time feeders, he'd written. They consume the moments we don't notice, the seconds between heartbeats, the pauses between thoughts, and they're growing hungrier. The water from the well started tasting strange too, metallic and slightly bitter. My skin became unusually sensitive to sunlight. After just 10 minutes outside, I developed strange, blistering patterns on my arms. Perfect geometric shapes, like snowflakes or circuit boards etched into my flesh. One evening, a dust storm blew in from the west. Through the swirling sand, I saw them for the first time with my naked eyes. Tall, impossibly thin figures standing in a perfect circle around the property. They didn't move, didn't seem affected by the biting wind and sand. When I grabbed my camera and aimed it at one, it simply wasn't there in the viewfinder. But when I lowered the camera, my eyes could see it clearly again. The next day, Diego didn't show up with supplies. It had been exactly 1 month since his last visit, and he'd never missed a delivery. I tried calling his cell phone, but there was no service. Finally, I decided to drive to his ranch myself. The drive should have taken 30 minutes according to the directions he'd given me. His ranch was just on the other side of Shadow Basin, accessible by a dirt road that wound around the depression's edge. But after an hour of driving, I still hadn't reached it. When I finally saw the buildings in the distance, something felt wrong. The front door of the main house was wide open. Diego's truck was parked with the driver's door hanging open, engine still running. Inside the house, I found a meal set out on the table, a half-eaten sandwich, coffee still warm in the cup. But no Diego, no one at all. In the living room, a TV was playing the local news. On the kitchen counter, a grocery list was half-written, the pen lying beside it as if dropped in mid-word. It was as if everyone had vanished in the middle of their normal day. The drive back to my property was even stranger. No matter which direction I drove, I somehow ended up heading toward my uncle's house. I tried going east, but the road curved north. I tried south, but somehow found myself heading west. It was as if the roads themselves were rearranging around me, always leading back to Shadow Basin. When I finally made it home as the sun was setting, I found the first spiral. Just beyond my porch steps, 7 jackrabbits lay dead, arranged in a perfect spiral pattern. They had no visible wounds, no sign of how they died. When I tried to move one, its body was completely flexible, as if it had died only moments ago, yet it was cold to the touch. The next morning, there were more. A spiral of desert mice, then lizards, then scorpions. Each day, the spirals grew larger and more complex. When I took one of the rabbits inside to examine it more closely, I found no cause of death, no internal injuries, no disease, nothing. It was as if life had simply stopped for these creatures between one heartbeat and the next. My perception of time became increasingly unreliable. Sunrise and sunset occurred at unpredictable intervals. Sometimes the night seemed to last for only a few hours. Other times, darkness stretched on endlessly. My watch would show 3:15 p.m., then suddenly jump to 8:47 p.m. without the hours in between. Yet when I checked the time against the shortwave radio's hourly signals, my watch was perfectly accurate. I tried to leave the property several times. Each attempt ended the same way. Hours of driving only to find myself approaching my uncle's house from the opposite direction I'd set out in. The roads looped impossibly, defying all logic and geography. The few landmarks I recognized appeared in impossible places, as if the landscape itself was being rearranged when I wasn't looking directly at it. The frozen moments were happening every few hours now. During one particularly long pause, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, faint, shimmering outlines of the tall figures, as if they were partially materialized in our world during these frozen seconds. One night, I woke to find my bed surrounded by motionless figures, their forms barely visible in the darkness, like heat mirages given vague shape. They vanished the instant I turned on the light, but I felt their presence lingering. In Uncle Franklin's workshop, I found a device that looked like a modified camera with strange filters and attachments. His notes indicated he had developed a method to photograph the thin ones by capturing light outside the normal spectrum. With trembling hands, I began experimenting with the equipment, following his instructions exactly. The new moon was tomorrow night, and a terrible understanding was growing within me. The standing ones were preparing for something. The spiral arrangements of dead animals, the increasing time distortions, the disappearance of Diego, it was all building towards something awful. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across Shadow Basin. For a brief moment, when the light hit at just the right angle, I could see them all. Dozens of impossibly tall, thin figures standing motionless. Throughout the basin, their elongated forms like black tears in the fabric of reality, and I knew with cold certainty that when darkness fell tomorrow night, they would come for me, just as they had come for Uncle Franklin. In the failing light, I checked my camera equipment one last time and steeled myself for what was to come. The final sunset before the new moon stretched out endlessly, the light catching on dust particles in the air and making them glow like tiny stars. As darkness finally claimed the basin, all natural sounds, the whisper of wind, the distant call of coyotes, even the sound of my own breathing, faded to absolute silence. And I waited, camera in hand, for the moment when the Standing Ones would fully enter our world. The new moon night arrived with an unnatural stillness. No wind stirred the desert brush, no insects chirped. Even the air felt frozen, like breathing. In glass, I sat on the porch with Uncle Franklin's modified camera in my lap, watching the last purple glow of twilight fade from the horizon. That's when it happened. The complete cessation of all movement in the basin. It was more absolute than the frozen moments I'd experienced before. This time I couldn't move either. My lungs couldn't draw breath. My heart couldn't beat. I existed in perfect suspension, caught between 1 second and the next. In that impossible stillness, they emerged. They rose from the shadows like ink spreading through water. The Skinwalkers, as Uncle Franklin had named them in his final journal entries. Impossibly tall and thin, their bodies seemed made of stretched darkness, limbs elongated beyond any human proportion. They had no features I could discern, just smooth, featureless faces that somehow still conveyed watchfulness. When I blinked, they were suddenly closer, not walking, not moving, just existing in a different spot with each moment of darkness between my blinks. I realized with horror that they moved only when not directly observed, slipping through the cracks in human perception. My body unlocked suddenly and I gasped for air. The camera in my lap felt impossibly heavy as I lifted it to my eye. Through Uncle Franklin's modified viewfinder, I could see them clearly now. Dozens of them, arranged in concentric circles throughout the basin, all facing my house. A voice entered my mind, not heard with my ears but appearing directly in my thoughts like words written on the inside of my skull. The Watcher returns, blood of the Measurer. I knew they meant Uncle Franklin, the Measurer, and me, his niece. The Watcher, time thief, came. Another thought accompanied by a feeling of ancient anger. Image stealer. I found myself answering without speaking. I don't understand. A sound like dry leaves rustling filled my head. What might have been laughter. You see us, capture us, freeze us, as he did. Memories that weren't mine flooded my mind. Uncle Franklin standing in the basin with his equipment, photographing them, measuring them. Their fury at being observed, quantified, captured in images. We feed on time. The moments between your thoughts, the pauses between your breaths, the spaces between your heartbeats. I understood suddenly. These ancient beings consumed time itself, not in large chunks but in microseconds, the infinitesimal pauses that humans never notice. Uncle Franklin had been measuring these missing moments, these tiny slices of stolen time. The Measurer gave himself to us, willingly. Trade, more foreign memories, Uncle Franklin making a deal, trading pieces of his own lifespan for knowledge, giving them minutes, hours, days of his life in exchange for glimpses of reality beyond. Human perception. As if to demonstrate, one of the Skinwalkers stretched out a limb impossibly long and thin. The air around it warped and twisted. My watch began spinning wildly, the second hand whirling around the face so fast it blurred. This is how we feed. Take time from one, give to another. I felt myself aging rapidly for several terrifying seconds. Skin, tightening, joints aching before snapping back to normal. They had just shown me how they could compress time, make me experience minutes in seconds, cannot create time, cannot destroy, only move, redistribute. That explained the compass and electronic malfunctions. The Skinwalkers weren't just living in the basin. They were actively manipulating the flow of time within it, creating ripples and distortions in the normal passage of seconds. I thought of the spiral arrangements of dead animals and asked about the Mancas, came the reply. Need stillness to maintain form. Need death moments to enter your world. The precisely arranged animals were temporal anchors, fixed points in time that allowed the skinwalkers to maintain their physical presence in our dimension. Each death created a small tear in time's fabric, a doorway they could use. I fumbled through Uncle Franklin's notes, my hands shaking. In his final entries, I found what I was looking for: his discovery that specialized light filtration could capture the entities on film. Somehow, photography froze them, trapped them momentarily in our perception of time. Violation, the thought, burned in my mind. Ancient agreement with First People: see but not capture, know but not prove. I understood then that the local tribes had known about the skinwalkers for centuries. They had an arrangement. The tribes would respect their territory, especially during feeding times, and in return, the skinwalkers would not harvest excessive time from the humans. But Uncle Franklin had broken that agreement with his photographs and measurements. He had attempted to prove their existence scientifically. Another memory surfaced. Not mine, not my uncle's, but older. Generation after generation of people disappearing in the basin. Not random victims, but specifically chosen. Bloodlines carefully selected and cultivated over centuries. Your family, the thought whispered. Special. See more than others. Feel time differently. The skinwalkers had been selectively breeding humans in the region for generations, creating bloodlines more sensitive to temporal phenomena. My family, Uncle Franklin's family, was one of those bloodlines. That's why we could see them when others couldn't, why we felt the frozen moments more acutely. The tallest of the skinwalkers glided forward without seeming to move. One moment, it was at the edge of the basin. The next, it stood before me on the porch. Choice, it communicated. Leave with evidence, or stay as caretaker. The meaning was clear. I could try to escape with my photographs and Uncle Franklin's research, exposing the skinwalkers to the world. But they would retaliate by consuming vast amounts of time from whoever they could reach, essentially killing people by aging them decades in minutes. Or I could become the new caretaker of Shadow Basin. Stay here. Document them, study them, but keep their secret. In exchange, they would protect me from their feeding. Why would you want me to document you if you were angry at my uncle for doing the same? I asked. Need to be remembered, need to be known, but not by all. One watcher. Only I realized with a chill that this had happened before, many times. Each bloodline, each caretaker, served for one lifetime before being replaced. Uncle Franklin had broken the rules by trying to share his knowledge with the outside world. Dawn was approaching. I could feel the skinwalkers growing more agitated. As the stars began to fade, choose now. Time runs differently for us. For you, short. For us, endless. I looked down at the camera in my hands, then at the house behind me. My uncle's house, now mine. I thought about the research, the photographs, the evidence that could prove to the world that these entities existed. Then I thought about the consequences, the people who would suffer if I broke the ancient agreement. Diego, already taken. Who would be next? I made my decision as the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern horizon. The skinwalkers watched, motionless, as I carried Uncle Franklin's research notes and photographs onto the porch. I placed them in a metal trash can, doused them with lighter fluid, and struck a match. As the flames consumed the evidence, I felt something shift in the air around me. Not approval exactly. The skinwalkers were too alien for such a human emotion, but acknowledgement, a contract renewed. Wise choice, new caretaker. They began to fade as sunlight crept across the basin, not disappearing but becoming less substantial, retreating to whatever dimension they occupied when not feeding in ours. I knew they would return with the darkness, and I would be waiting, camera in hand, to document their existence, not for the world but for them, for the record, for the agreement that kept others safe. In the weeks that followed, I adapted to my new role. I set up permanent observation in posts around the basin. I maintained Uncle Franklin's equipment, learning its purpose through trial and error. I kept detailed journals of the skinwalkers' activities, their feeding patterns, their communications. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of them even during daylight, brief flickers at the corner of my vision, a sense of watchfulness from the shadows. They were always there, existing in the moments between moments. The frozen time episodes continued, but they became routine, expected. I no longer fought against the metallic taste, the temporary loss of color perception. These were simply the side effects of living on the edge of time distortion. Diego never returned, and I never tried to find out what happened to him. Some questions were better left unanswered. On clear nights, I would sit on the porch with my camera, photographing the basin as darkness fell. Through Uncle Franklin's modified viewfinder, I could see them clearly, standing motionless among the sagebrush, watching me, watching them. An observer and the observed, locked in an ancient dance of perception. I knew I would never leave Shadow Basin now. This was my purpose, my inheritance, to document the undocumentable, to witness the eternal stillness at dusk, when the world pauses between heartbeats and ancient things slip through the cracks in time. Sometimes in the deepest parts of night, I wonder if I made the right choice, if another way might have been possible. But then I feel them watching, waiting in their perfect stillness, and I know there never really was a choice at all. My name is Eliza Montgomery. I am the caretaker of Shadow Basin, and as long as I maintain the agreement, as long as I keep their secret, time will continue to flow normally for everyone else. This is my burden, my duty, my purpose. Until the day comes when another of my bloodline arrives to take my place, I will stand guard at the edge of perception, watching the watchers in the stillness at dusk. My name is Thomas Reynolds. 3 months ago, I packed everything I owned into my beat-up Chevy truck and drove out to my grandfather's old place in the New Mexico desert. After what I saw in Korea, I couldn't handle being around people anymore. The noise, the questions, the looks of pity, I just needed to get away from it all. The war left me with nightmares that made me afraid to close my eyes. Doctors called it combat fatigue, but that doesn't begin to describe the feeling of hearing artillery shells when there aren't any, or seeing your dead friends walking down the street. I figured if I was going to be alone with my demons, I might as well do it somewhere truly alone. My grandfather's adobe house sits in a strange valley. It's like someone dropped a patch of green paradise right in the middle of red, dusty nowhere. The weird thing is, scattered throughout the property are these perfect circles where nothing grows. I've tested the soil. It's exactly the same as the fertile areas just a few feet away, but not even weeds will take root in these barren spots. For weeks, I've been fixing up the place. The old irrigation channels needed cleaning out, but they still worked fine after I got the pump going. I planted a vegetable garden near the house and fixed up the chicken coop and goat pen. My plan was simple: grow my own food, raise some animals, and never have to deal with the outside world again. During the day I explore the mesas and canyons around the property. There's something not quite right about this place. I've been marking trails and taking notes, but some of the rock formations seem to move. Not while I'm watching, but I'll come back a day later and I swear that boulder wasn't in that spot before. I started taking pictures to make sure I'm not losing my mind. Once a month, an old Navajo man named Eli Begay drives out in his rusty truck with supplies I can't produce myself. Salt, coffee, ammunition, that sort of thing. Eli doesn't talk much, but last time he was here, he said something that's been keeping me up at night. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, staring into the distance as the sun began to set, "you must always keep a fire burning after dark." When I asked why, he just shook his head. There are skin changes in these lands. They walk the desert at night, never follow animal sounds after the sun goes down. Never. I laughed it off, but Eli didn't crack a smile. He just loaded up his truck and left before darkness fell. Yesterday, I started digging a new well closer to the garden. About 4 feet down, my shovel hit something hard. At first, I thought it was just a rock, but when I brushed away the dirt, I found pieces of pottery. The clay fragments were covered with paintings that made my skin crawl, human-like figures with animal heads, but not like Egyptian gods or anything friendly. These looked like creatures crawling out of human skins. The people in the paintings had faces twisted in pain. I almost threw the pieces away, but something made me keep them. I brought them back to the house and cleaned them up. Under better light, they looked even more disturbing. That night, I found my grandfather's old journals in his office. I never knew him well. He died when I was young, but reading his words felt like he was in the room with me. The journals started normal enough, talking about farming and weather, but the later entries took a dark turn. He wrote about desert walkers, things that looked human but moved wrong when they thought nobody was watching. They can wear our shapes, he wrote, but they don't understand how to use them properly. According to his notes, he'd been watching them for years, trying to understand what they were and what they wanted. Last week, a dust storm rolled in. I was securing the chicken coop when I saw them. Human shapes walking through the swirling sand. They were just silhouettes, circling the property about 100 yards out. I grabbed my rifle and went to investigate, but by the time I reached the spot, they were gone. The strange part was, there were no footprints, even though the ground was soft from recent rain. This morning, I went through more of my grandfather's things and found a stack of old newspaper clippings. They were all about people who disappeared in this area over the last 50 years. Each disappearance happened during the same moon phase. I checked the calendar. We're 3 days away from that same moon. Today, I went hunting, hoping to get my mind off everything. That's when I saw the coyote. At first it looked normal, but the way it moved wasn't right. Animals have a natural flow to their movement, but this one, it was like someone built a coyote out of parts and didn't know exactly how they should fit together. It stopped about 30 yards from me and just stared. Its eyes weren't animal eyes. They looked almost human. It didn't blink, didn't move, just watched me for almost 2 hours before it turned and walked away. Each step perfectly measured, like it was counting. When Eli came with supplies this afternoon, I finally confronted him about everything I'd found. He was quiet for a long time, then said, "Your grandfather didn't die of a heart attack like they told everyone." He looked around nervously before continuing. He disappeared during a full moon. The week before, he told me he had captured one of the changing ones while it was still wearing a human skin. I asked Eli what he meant by wearing a human skin. He just shook his head, loaded up his truck and drove away faster than usual. Tonight, as I write this by the fire, which I'm keeping burning just like Eli said, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me from just beyond the circle of light. Every now and then, I hear noises that sound almost like words, but not quite. And twice now, I've caught glimpses of eyes reflecting the firelight from the darkness. Tomorrow is the full moon. I've locked all the doors and windows, loaded my rifle, and set up extra lanterns around the house. Whatever's out there, whatever my grandfather found, I think it's coming for me next. I haven't been sleeping well. The nightmares started 3 nights ago, right after the full moon. In them, my skin feels loose, like a coat that's too big. I can feel it sliding around on my muscles, and in the worst parts of the dreams, it starts to come off. I wake up sweating, my heart racing like I've run a mile. This morning, something happened that made the nightmares seem real. I was washing up in the bathroom when I felt a strange itch along my back. Using a hand mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A thin, straight cut running down my spine. It wasn't deep, more like a scratch, but it was too perfect. Too straight to be an accident. It looked like someone had taken a sharp knife and carefully drawn it down my back while I slept. The animals have been acting strange too. Yesterday, I went to feed the chickens and found them all standing in a perfect circle, facing inward. They weren't moving, just standing still as statues. When I clapped my hands, they scattered like normal chickens, but an hour later, they were back in the same formation. The goats are even worse. This morning before dawn, I heard them making noises I've never heard goats make before. It wasn't bleating. It sounded almost like words, like they were trying to talk. When I went to check on them, they were arranged in a perfect triangle, each one exactly the same distance from the others. They all turned their heads to look at me at the exact same moment, moving like they were connected by invisible strings. I've started finding things around the property, little models of my house made from twigs and small bones. The first one was tiny, about the size of my palm, but each new one I find is bigger and more detailed. The latest one had little rooms inside, with furniture made from twigs and bits of cloth. There was even a tiny bed with a small figure lying in it, made from what looked like the bones of a mouse or small bird. The figure was shaped like a person, like me. As the full moon gets closer, those bare circles in the ground are changing. I was walking past one yesterday and could have sworn I saw it move. I stopped and stared at it for nearly 10 minutes and nothing happened. But the second I turned away, I caught a movement from the corner of my eye. When I looked back quickly, the soil was settling back into place, like something had pushed it up from below and then let it fall. I've been locking all the doors and windows at night, but something isn't right. Every morning, I find footprints leading from my bedroom door out into the desert and then back again. They match my boots exactly, same size, same worn-down heel, but the way the feet are placed isn't how I walk. The steps are too even, too perfectly spaced. Eli was supposed to bring supplies 3 days ago, but he never showed up. I finally drove to his trading post yesterday, worried something might have happened to him. The place was completely empty. No Eli, no merchandise, nothing but dust and silence. On the back wall, someone had written something in what looked like red paint. I don't speak Navajo, but I took a picture with my Polaroid and showed it to a man at the gas station on my way back. He turned white as a sheet and wouldn't tell me what it said. He just gave me back the photo and walked away fast. Later, I found a dictionary in my grandfather's books and worked out the words myself. It said, "They are wearing Thomas now." My reflection is starting to scare me. This morning, while shaving, I noticed something odd. When I moved my hand, my reflection followed just a beat too slow, like there was a delay. And sometimes, when I turn away from the mirror, I can see from the corner of my eye that my reflection stays put, watching me. Once I spun around quickly and caught it, my own face in the mirror, wearing an expression I wasn't making, a small smile I could never form with my own mouth. By the time I blinked, it was normal again, copying my shocked face perfectly. There are no animals in the desert anymore, no birds, no lizards, not even insects. But I keep finding animal skins laid out carefully around my property. Perfect, complete skins, coyote, rabbit, snake, all empty, with no blood, no cuts, nothing to show how the insides were removed. They're just empty sacks, shaped like animals, arranged in circles around my house, with their empty eye holes all facing inward toward me. The strangest thing happened yesterday. I was cleaning out my grandfather's office and found a box hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace. Inside were cameras, small ones, the kind people use for spying, and a stack of notebooks. The cameras looked like they had been set up around my bed, though I never put them there. The notebooks contained detailed notes about my sleep patterns. When I move, when I talk in my sleep, how deep my breathing gets. The notes were in my handwriting, but the dates on them were months in the future. I don't remember writing any of it. Last night, during a dust storm, I saw them clearly for the first time. I was securing the windows when movement outside caught my eye. Through the swirling dust I saw shapes, not human, not animal, but something in between. They were shedding, peeling off what looked like animal skins to reveal something else underneath. Their movements were all wrong, joints bending in impossible directions, bodies twisting in ways that would break human bones. But the worst part was how they moved together, like dancers who had practiced the same routine for 1,000 years, each one matching the others perfectly. They circled my house 3 times, then disappeared into the storm. I'm writing this by candlelight now. The electricity went out an hour ago. Outside, the wind is picking up and the full moon is rising. Something is scratching at the door, just light, patient scratching, like it knows it has all night to get in. Or like it knows it doesn't need to get in at all, because it's already here. A few minutes ago, I looked out the window and saw myself standing in the yard, looking back at the house. But I'm here, writing this. Whatever is out there wearing, my face is not me, and yet I feel drawn to it. Part of me wants to go outside, to follow it into the desert and see where it leads me. Maybe that's exactly what my grandfather did. I don't know how long I stood at the window watching that thing. With my face, it just waited there, patient as the desert itself, staring back at me with my own eyes. When it finally turned and walked into the darkness, I knew I had to follow. Something deep inside told me this was why I came here. Not to escape the war, but to face whatever my grandfather had discovered. I grabbed my flashlight, my grandfather's journal, and my gun, though some part of me knew the gun wouldn't help. The full moon lit up the desert like a pale sun, casting sharp shadows behind every rock and cactus. I followed my double across the sand, staying about 50 yards back. It never turned around, but somehow I knew it was aware of me following. Led me to the largest of those barren circles, the one at the center of the property. In the moonlight, the circle looked darker than the surrounding desert, like a hole cut into the world. My double stopped at the edge, then turned to look at me. Its face, my face, split into a smile too wide for human muscles to make. Then it stepped into the circle and disappeared. Not ran away, not ducked down, disappeared like it had stepped through an invisible door. I approached the circle slowly. The earth beneath my feet felt strange, vibrating slightly like the skin of a drum. When I reached the edge of the circle, I saw that the ground had opened up, revealing a stone staircase spiraling down into darkness. The stairs looked ancient, carved from the red stone of the desert, worn smooth by countless feet over what must have been thousands of years. I should have run. I should have driven away from this place and never looked back. Instead, I turned on my flashlight and started down the stairs. The passage went deep, much deeper than seemed possible. I walked down for what felt like an hour, the air growing colder with each step. Finally, the staircase opened into a massive underground chamber. The room was perfectly circular, with smooth walls that seemed to shimmer slightly, like they weren't quite solid. In the center stood a ring of stone pillars, each carved with symbols like the ones on the pottery fragments I'd found. Between the pillars, moving in and out of the shadows, were the skinwalkers. In the dim light, I could finally see them clearly. Some wore animal shapes, coyotes, eagles, snakes, but they moved wrong, like the skins were ill-fitting costumes. Others looked human, including the one wearing my face, but as I watched, one of them, the one that looked like an old woman, began to change. Its skin rippled and then split down the middle. From inside the human-shaped skin, something else emerged. It wasn't solid, not exactly. It was like dense smoke, shaped roughly like a person, but constantly shifting and flowing. It had no true face, just darker patches where eyes might be. It moved like water, flowing out of the human skin, which collapsed empty to the ground. The smoke thing noticed me and paused. Then it flowed across the room faster than I could react, stopping just inches from my face. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I felt like it was looking straight through me, seeing every thought I'd ever had, Thomas Reynolds, it said, though it had no mouth. The voice seemed to form directly in my mind. You have come, as your grandfather did. More of them approached, some still wearing skins, others in their true smoke-like form. They surrounded me but didn't touch me. I found my voice somehow. What are you? I asked. We are the Guardians, the first one said. We maintain the boundaries between what is and what should not be. Another one spoke, its voice higher, almost musical. We cannot exist in your world without skins. Animal, human, it does not matter. The skin allows us to remain solid. You take people, I managed to ask. The missing people in the newspapers. Only when necessary, said the first one. When our old skins wear out. When the boundary grows thin during the moon time. They showed me then, not with words, but with images they somehow put right into my head. They showed me how they had existed since before humans walked the earth. How they guarded tears in reality, where other things, worse things, might slip through. How they needed physical forms to interact with our world, to repair the places where reality grew thin. Your grandfather found us, said one wearing the skin of a young man. He trapped one of us between forms, learned things no human should know. And you killed him, I asked, anger rising through my fear. No, said the first one, we showed him, as we show you now. He chose to come with us, to see beyond. They parted then, revealing a final figure walking toward me. It wore my grandfather's face, just as I remembered it from photographs. But when he smiled, I knew it wasn't really him, just another skin they wore. These circles, I said, understanding finally coming. They're thin spots, aren't they? Places where your world and mine touch. Yes, said the one in my grandfather's skin. Nothing grows there because matter exists in both places at once. Uncertain, the one with my face stepped forward. We study humanity. We need to understand how your minds work. Your war memories, the spaces the trauma created in your mind, they are similar to our home. Suddenly I understood the cameras, the journals, my independent reflection. You've been watching me. You made a copy of me. Yes, said my double, to interact with your world while we studied the real you. And now, I asked, what happens now? The original smoke being moved closer. Now you must choose. Your form is special to us. Your mind has spaces where our consciousness fits perfectly. You could let us wear you permanently, help us guard the boundary. Or you can destroy this place, break the connection between worlds. If I let you destroy this place, I asked, what happens to the boundaries you guard? Unknown, said the being. Perhaps nothing for many years. Perhaps something breaks through tomorrow, something worse than us. And if I let you wear me, what happens to me? You would join with us, said the one in my grandfather's skin. Your consciousness would merge with ours. You would see beyond your world, as your grandfather now does. I thought about my life above, the nightmares, the loneliness, the feeling that I never quite belonged anywhere. Then I thought about what might come through if these beings couldn't do their work. In the end, the choice seemed clear. I reached out my hand to the smoke being. I'll help you, I said, but I need to know something first. Those people who disappeared, are they still conscious? Still aware? Parts of them, said the being, the parts that matter most. And my grandfather, is he still somewhere in there? The being wearing my grandfather's skin stepped forward and put a hand on my shoulder. For just a moment, the eyes changed, and I saw something familiar in them, something that was truly my grandfather. Thomas, it said in a voice I almost recognized. It's not what you think. It's not possession. It's transformation. I've seen things you can't imagine. I took a deep breath. Then I made my choice. In a small trading post on the edge of the New Mexico desert, Eli Begay looks up as the bell over the door rings. A tall man in dusty clothes walks in, smiling politely. Mr. Reynolds, says Eli cautiously. I didn't expect to see you again. Just picking up some supplies, says the man who looks like Thomas Reynolds. Thought I'd save you the trip out to my place. Eli studies the man carefully. How have you been sleeping? Any more nightmares? Thomas smiles. No nightmares. I've never slept better. As Thomas picks out supplies, Eli notices something odd about the way he moves. Fluid, almost too graceful, like each motion is carefully calculated. Will there be anything else? Eli asks when Thomas brings his items to the counter. Thomas looks out the window at the setting sun. No, that's all. I should be getting back before dark. He pays and turns to leave, then stops at the door. No, Eli, you were right about keeping a fire burning at night. There are dangerous things in the desert, things that wear familiar faces. With a smile that's just a little too wide, Thomas walks out into the gathering darkness. Eli watches him go, then reaches for the shotgun he keeps under the counter. As the sun sets over the desert, he begins to bar the doors and windows of the trading post. Tonight, he will keep the fire burning extra bright. My name is Jack Reynolds, and I bought this land to escape the noise in my head. After 2 tours in Vietnam, I couldn't handle crowds or sudden sounds anymore. Every car backfire sent me diving for cover. Every helicopter overhead brought back the memories. So I found this place, 40 acres of forest and hills in West Virginia, far from everything that reminded me of the war. The real estate agent kept saying how I was getting such a deal on the land. Nobody wanted it, she said, because it was too far from town and had odd local stories attached to it. I didn't care about stories. I cared about peace and quiet. I built my cabin with my own 2 hands. Simple work, good work, the kind that lets your mind rest while your body stays busy. I planted a garden, set up rain barrels, and started to feel like maybe I could make a real home here. About a week after I moved in, an old truck bumped up my dirt driveway. I reached for my rifle, old habits, but it was just an old man with white whiskers and overalls. He introduced himself as Emmett Miller, my only neighbor for miles around. Figured you might want some company, he said, handing me a jar of homemade moonshine, and some knowledge about living off this land. Emmett became my first real friend since coming home from the war. He taught me which mushrooms were safe to eat, how to track deer by barely there signs, and where the best fishing spots were hidden. But he had one rule he never broke. Don't go into Howler's Hollow after sunset, he told me one evening as we sat on my porch. Not for any reason. When I asked why, he just took a long sip from his jar and stared at the darkening trees. Some places ain't meant for people after dark, was all he said. I figured it was just old-timer superstition. I'd seen real horror in Vietnam. What could a dark valley possibly hold that would scare me? One morning, while clearing trees to expand my garden, I noticed something strange on an oak trunk. 5 long marks carved deep into the bark, about 7 feet up. Too high for a bear, and bears only leave 4 claw marks anyway. These looked almost like fingers spread wide, with sharp tips that dug deep into the wood. I touched the marks. They were fresh. Probably just a weird branch scrape, I told myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My dog Rex started, noticing it too. I'd brought him with me from back home, a loyal German shepherd who'd helped keep the nightmares at bay on the worst nights. He was trained for police work before I got him, fearless and disciplined, but something about these woods changed him. He began growling at empty spaces between trees. Sometimes he'd stop dead in his tracks during our walks, hackles raised, refusing to move forward into certain clearings that seemed perfectly normal to me. One morning, Rex wouldn't leave the cabin. He just sat by the door, whining softly when I tried to call him outside. I went hunting alone that day. Deep in the forest, I felt it for the first time, that crawling sensation of being watched. The woods had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, just a heavy stillness that pressed against my ears. Then, from somewhere far off, I heard a long, wavering howl that didn't sound like any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard. When I mentioned it to Emmett later, he shrugged it off. "Just mountain sounds," he said too quickly. "You'll get used to them." But his hands shook slightly as he cleaned his rifle. In town, at Parker's General Store, I overheard two old men talking in hushed voices while I picked up supplies. Saw Miller's. "Old truck up at the new fella's place again," one said. "Poor bastard doesn't know what he's got himself into," the other replied. "Miller's folly all over again." When they noticed me listening, they clammed up fast. I asked the store owner about it later, but he just shook his head. "Emmett lost his family up there 30 years back," he said quietly. "Wife and 2 children, never found the bodies. Most folks would have moved away, but not Emmett. Says he has his reasons for staying close." After that, I started paying closer attention to my land. I found things I hadn't noticed before, like an old rotting hunting blind hidden among thick trees near the edge of my property. Inside were tattered pieces of clothing, an old broken rifle stock, and a weather-damaged journal. Most pages were ruined, but I could make out one scribbled entry. "They're not wolves. They walk like men, but hunt like wolves. God help me, they're learning my scent." I showed it to Emmett, but he took the journal from my hands and threw it in my fireplace before I could stop him. "Some things are better left alone, Jack," he said, his voice hard. It was during the next full moon that things got weirder. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the night air, when I heard crashing through the underbrush. A herd of deer burst from the trees, running faster than I'd ever seen deer move. They weren't just running, they were blind with terror, so frightened that 2 of them slammed into trees and broke their necks rather than slow down. Whatever they were running from, I never saw it. But the next morning, I found 3 of those deer half-eaten about 50 yards from my cabin. The kills weren't right, not like any predator I knew. The hearts and livers were cleanly removed, with almost surgical precision. No wolf or bear. It kills like that. That afternoon, Emmett's truck came bouncing up my drive. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. "Full moon was last night," he said, as if that explained everything. He handed me a small wooden box. Inside were 12 bullets gleaming silver in the sunlight. "Something unnatural lives in those woods, Jack," he finally admitted. "Keep these close. They won't kill it, but they'll slow it down enough for you to run." "What are they for?" I asked, rolling one of the strange bullets between my fingers. Emmett just looked at me with sad eyes. "Let's hope you never need to find." Out. The rain came down hard that night, drumming on my cabin roof like machine gun fire. Lightning flashed, and for a moment I was back in the jungle again. I sat up all night with my rifle across my lap, jumping at every crack of thunder. When morning finally came, the storm had passed. I stepped outside to check for damage, and that's when I saw them. Footprints in the mud all around my cabin. But these weren't animal tracks, at least not any animal I knew. They were huge, almost 12 inches long, and shaped like dog paws. But the strange thing was, they didn't move on 4 legs. The prints showed something walking on 2 legs, like a man. I followed them around my cabin, my heart beating faster with each step. Whatever made these tracks had circled my home all night, stopping at each window, as if it had been looking in at me while I sat in the dark. The tracks led into the woods, toward Howler's Hollow. I thought about following them, but remembered Emmett's silver bullets and his warnings. Instead, I spent the day reinforcing my doors and windows. 3 days later, Rex disappeared. I called and whistled until my voice gave out, but he didn't. "Come!" I searched the edges of my property, but stopped short of entering the hollow. Each night, I left food on the porch and kept a light on, hoping he'd find his way back. On the 3rd morning, I heard scratching at my door just after sunrise. There was Rex, but not the same dog who had left. His eyes had a distant, glassy look. Patches of fur were missing from his back and sides, and carved into his skin were strange marks. Not random cuts, but deliberate symbols I didn't recognize. They weren't bleeding, but looked fresh, like someone had carefully carved them with. A knife. Rex wouldn't let me touch him for days. He'd growl if I came too close, then whimper and hide under my bed. At night, he stared out the windows, trembling, as if he could see things I couldn't. That's when the nightmares started. I'd dream I was running through the dark woods. Something huge crashing through the trees behind me. In the dreams, I could hear Emmett's voice calling to me from the shadows. "Come this way, Jack. I know a safe place." But when I'd turn toward his voice, all I'd see were yellow eyes floating in the darkness, and below them, wet jaws filled with teeth. I'd wake up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. One afternoon, while fixing a loose shingle on my roof, I happened to glance toward the tree line at the edge of my cleared land. Something moved between the trees, something big. At first, I thought it was a bear standing on its hind legs, but then it moved. It crossed 100 yards of forest in seconds, weaving between trees faster than any human could run, yet standing upright the whole time. The shadow was massive, easily 7 feet tall, but too far away to make out clearly. I nearly fell off the roof, scrambling to get down and inside. That night, my perimeter alarms went off. Tin cans strung on wire that I'd placed around a cabin after seeing those footprints. I grabbed my rifle and Emmett's silver bullets, loading them with shaking hands. But when I worked up the courage to look outside, there was nothing there. Nothing except a neat pile of bones arranged on my porch steps. They were animal bones, rabbit, squirrel, deer, carefully stacked and positioned to form a symbol. The same symbol I'd seen carved into Rex's skin. The next day, I drove to Emmett's place. His truck was there, but he didn't answer my knocks. The door wasn't locked, which wasn't unusual for these parts. Inside, everything was clean and orderly, but something felt wrong. A plate of eggs and bacon sat on the table, still warm, fork halfway through the meal. His reading glasses were on his open Bible. His shotgun, which Emmett treated like a prized possession, was bent into an impossible shape, like someone had twisted it as easily as a child bends a straw. Emmett was gone. That's when the lost time started happening. I'd be chopping wood in my yard, and suddenly find myself standing ankle-deep in a stream far from my cabin, with no memory of how I got there. Once, I came to with my back against a tree, halfway, up a hillside I didn't recognize. My arms had fresh cuts on them, little half-moon shapes like teeth marks, arranged in the same weird pattern I'd seen on Rex and on my porch. I tried to convince myself I was just stressed, that maybe the war had damaged my mind more than I'd admitted, but I knew it was something else. Something was happening to me, just like it had happened to Rex, just like it had happened to Emmett. One morning, I decided to hunt, thinking some familiar routine might help clear my head. That's when I saw it. I was in my blind, watching a small clearing when a young buck stepped into view. Suddenly the deer's head shot up, nostrils flaring. Before it could run, something huge burst from the bushes. I only caught glimpses, grayish-brown fur, powerful muscles, impossibly long limbs. It moved so fast the whole attack was over in seconds. The creature stood upright over its kill, easily 7 feet tall, but its back was to me. I raised my rifle, hands trembling, but couldn't bring myself to fire. Something told me that if it knew I was there, I'd be next. The thing lifted its head and howled, a sound that started like a wolf's cry, but shifted into something that made my skin crawl, almost like words spoken through an animal's throat. Then it grabbed the deer with hands, not paws, but actual hands with long clawed fingers, and dragged it into the brush. I ran all the way back to my cabin, packed a bag, and was halfway to my truck when I stopped. Where would I go? Who would believe me? And something else, a feeling I couldn't explain, told me that running wouldn't help, that this thing, whatever it was, would find me anywhere. That's when I noticed the markings on the trees around my property, fresh carvings in the bark. Not like the claw marks I'd seen before, but deliberate symbols. I took photos and drove into town, hands still shaking. The local library was small, but the elderly librarian knew exactly what I was looking for when I showed her the pictures. "These are old Shawnee markings," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Warning signs. They mark the territory of what they called the skinwalkers between worlds. Bad spirits that aren't fully animal or fully human. The tribes avoided these hills after dark." She showed me a book of local folklore. The stories went back hundreds of years, settlers disappearing in the hills, strange howls in the night, people found with their organs removed in what locals called the Hungry Moon killings. That night was another full moon. I barricaded myself in the cabin, pushing furniture against the doors and windows. Rex huddled under my bed, whimpering. Around midnight, the sounds started. "Jack? Jack, are you in there? I'm hurt bad. I need help." It was Emmett's voice, coming from just beyond my porch. "Please, Jack. Something attacked me in the woods. I can. See a light on, please." I almost opened the door, but then I remembered Emmett's shotgun, twisted like paper. Whatever was out there, it wasn't Emmett. "Jack Reynolds. This is Sheriff Donnelly. We've had reports of gunshots in the area. Open up, son." I'd never met the sheriff, but the voice sounded official, confident. It moved around my cabin, calling from different windows. Then came the worst voice of all. My own. "They're inside. With me now, Emmett. They're standing right behind you. Run." It was my voice, perfectly mimicked, down to the way I pronounced certain words. I covered my ears, but I could still hear it, laughing now, a crowd of voices all talking at once, some whispering, some shouting, all circling my cabin like wolves around wounded prey. When dawn finally came, the voices stopped. I looked outside at the fresh footprints in the dirt. Whatever had been out there had paced around my cabin all night. Dozens of those huge, dog-like footprints, walking upright like a man. I knew then that I couldn't keep hiding. I had to find out what happened to Emmett. I had to understand what these things were. And somehow I knew the answers waited for me in Howler's Hollow, the one place Emmett had warned me never to go. I waited until midday to head toward Howler's Hollow. Something told me these creatures, whatever they were stronger at night. I packed a backpack with water, food, a flashlight, my pistol with regular bullets, and my rifle loaded with Emmett's silver ones. Rex wouldn't come with me. He just watched from the porch, tail between his legs, as I walked toward the hollow. Before going to the hollow, I made one last visit to Emmett's cabin. I needed clues about what I was facing. This time I searched more carefully. Under a loose floorboard beneath his bed, I found a tin box containing old photos, newspaper clippings about missing hikers dating back decades, and a hand-drawn map. The map showed my property, Emmett's land, and Howler's Hollow. In the center of the hollow was a circle with strange markings and the words, "The Mouth." I folded the map and put it in my pocket. Whatever the mouth was, it seemed important. Howler's Hollow was a steep-sided valley about a mile from my cabin. In the daylight, it looked like any other part of the forest, but as I descended into it, the air felt heavier, colder. Birds stopped singing. Even the insects went quiet. I found the first sign that I was on the right track at the bottom of the hollow, a pile of deer bones arranged in the same pattern I'd seen on my porch. Beyond it was an opening in the hillside, partially hidden by bushes. Not a natural cave entrance, but something that looked dug out, with strange claw marks around the edges. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The tunnel sloped downward, deeper into the earth. The walls were covered with those same symbols I'd seen carved into trees and into Rex's skin. Some looked ancient, others freshly carved. After about 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a larger cave. What I saw there stopped me cold. The walls were covered with missing persons posters, photographs, driver's licenses and personal items, watches, wallets, jewelry, all neatly arranged by decade. The oldest items looked to be from the early 1900s, the newest from just last month. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands, had disappeared in these woods over the years. In the center of the cave was a crude altar made of stones. On it sat Emmett's hat, along with his pipe and tobacco pouch. A sound behind me made me spin around, raising my rifle. Standing at the cave entrance was Emmett. "You shouldn't have come here, Jack," he said softly. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What happened to all these people?" Emmett sighed, looking suddenly much older. "They were sacrifices, necessary ones." Then he stepped into the light, and I saw that his eyes had changed. They glowed yellow in the beam of my flashlight. His movements were different too, stiffer, like someone wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. "You're not Emmett," I said, backing away. "Not anymore," he admitted. "But I have his memories, his knowledge." He tapped his head. "It's all in here." "What are you?" I whispered. Before he could answer, a low growl echoed through the cave. From the shadows beyond Emmett, they emerged, 3 massive figures walking upright on 2 legs. They were shaped like wolves, but stood like men, their bodies covered in thick grey-brown fur. Their faces were the worst part, not quite wolf, not quite human, with snouts full of teeth and eyes that were too intelligent. In that moment, I understood what I was seeing. The dogmen of Howler's Hollow. "We've been waiting for you, Jack Reynolds," one of them said, its voice a guttural rumble that somehow formed words. It was the largest of the 3, with fur streaked with silver. I raised my rifle, but Emmett, or whatever was wearing his skin, stepped forward. "They won't hurt you, Jack. Not if you listen. Not if you understand." "Understand what?" I asked, finger trembling on the trigger. "What we are," the lead creature said. "What we do here." It reached out a clawed hand and touched the wall of missing persons posters. "We are the guardians of the gate. We have been here since before your kind built cities, before you had words for what lives in the dark." The creature explained that Howler's Hollow wasn't just a place, it was a thin spot between our world and somewhere else. The dogmen weren't from our world, but they weren't from the other side either. They existed in between, guarding a dimensional weak point they called the mouth. "Beyond the mouth waits something that must never cross over," the creature said. "Something that would see your entire world as nothing but food." "Why all these people?" I asked, gesturing to the walls. "Why take them?" "We require sustenance," another of the creatures said. "Not just flesh, but fear. Human fear is powerful. It feeds the barrier, keeps the mouth sealed." The third creature, smaller than the others with reddish fur, leaned closer, sniffing at me. "Your fear smells different, richer, deeper. Your war memories," Emmett or his body explained. "The trauma you carry from Vietnam, they can smell it, taste it. It makes your fear more powerful than ordinary humans. Is that why you brought me here?" I asked Emmett. "To feed them." Emmett's body smiled sadly. "I didn't bring you here, Jack. They did. They've been watching you since before you bought this land. They arranged everything, the real estate agent who sold you the property, the deal you got on the price. They needed you here." "Where's the real Emmett?" I demanded. "Gone," said the lead creature. "He served us well for many years, brought us travelers, hikers, people who wouldn't be missed, but he grew old. We needed someone new." "You want me to replace him?" I felt sick. "To lure people here to die? To serve a greater purpose," the creature corrected. "To keep the mouth sealed, to prevent what waits on the other side from entering your world." The creature stepped closer, and I caught a glimpse of something underneath its fur, a pattern of scars that matched the symbols I'd been seeing. "We can show you," it said, reaching toward me with those long, clawed fingers. "We can taste your memories, and you can taste ours. You can see what we've seen, what we guard against." I tried to back away, but the cave wall was behind me. Its hand touched my forehead, and suddenly I wasn't in the cave anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold and wrong. I saw the thing beyond the mouth, a vast, shapeless mass of hunger and hatred, pressing against the thin barrier between worlds, seeking a way in. I saw what would happen if it broke through, cities falling, millions dying, the world ending, not with a bang, but with a feast. And I saw the dogmen standing at the barrier for centuries, using human fear and flesh to keep it sealed. When I came back to myself, I was on my knees in the cave, gasping for air. The creatures stood over me. "Now you understand," the leader said, "why we do what we do, why we need a human ally, someone who can bring us what we need." I struggled to my feet, my mind racing. "You can change your shape," I said, remembering. How they'd mimicked voices, how something was wearing Emmett's skin. "You can look human when you want to." "For short times," the reddish one confirmed. "It takes much energy. We prefer our true forms." "And those marks in the trees? On Rex? What are they?" "Our language," the silver-streaked one said. "Signs to mark our territory, to warn others of our kind. There are more of you? In other thin places, other borders that need guarding." I thought of the journal I'd found in the hunting blind. The person who wrote that they walk like men, but hunt like wolves had been right. "You can't cross Silver," I said, remembering Emmett's bullets. The creatures hissed, backing away slightly. "It burns us, a weakness from our first days in your world." That's when I noticed something else, the way they moved around certain spots, in the cave floor, avoiding them completely. Looking closer, I saw thin veins of silver ore running through the rock. "But you can move through solid stone," I said, understanding now how they'd circled my cabin without triggering my other alarms. "When we wish," the leader nodded. "We are not fully bound by your world's rules." A low rumbling sound suddenly filled the cave, like distant thunder, but coming from below us. The creatures tensed, heads tilted as if listening. "It senses you," the leader said. "Your fear calls to it. It hungers." "The mouth is growing restless," Emmett's body added. "It needs feeding." I realized then what choice I faced. I could try to kill these creatures with my silver bullets, but what if they were telling the truth? What if they really were all that stood between our world and something worse? Or I could become like Emmett, a servant to these things, helping them lure innocent people to their deaths. "There must be another way," I said desperately. The leader tilted its head. "There is not, but you need not decide now. Return to your cabin. Think on what you have seen. We will come for your answer when the moon is full again." They let me leave the cave. I half expected them to attack me from behind, but they didn't. They just watched with those glowing yellow eyes as I backed away, then turned and ran through the forest toward my cabin. That night, I sat on my porch with my rifle across my knees, watching the woods. Rex lay at my feet, calmer than he'd been in weeks, as if he sensed that some kind of understanding had been reached. I thought about what I'd learned, about the dogman and the mouth, and the thing waiting on the other side. I thought about all those missing people over the decades, sacrificed to keep that thing sealed away. And I thought about what it would mean to become like Emmett, a caretaker or a monster, depending on how you looked at it. I had 1 month until the next full moon. 1 month to decide whether to run away and let whatever was coming happen without me, or to stay and make an impossible choice between becoming a murderer or risking something much worse. As I sat there in the darkness, I heard a distant howl from the direction of the hollow, a sound halfway between a wolf's cry and a human scream, a reminder of what waited for my answer. "My name is Jack Reynolds. I came to these mountains to escape the horrors of war. Instead, I found something far worse, a horror that's been here all along, hiding in the hollow dark, waiting for someone like me to discover its terrible truth. And now I have 1 month to decide the fate of not just myself, but possibly the entire world. My name is Michael Thornton. I used to be a park ranger, someone who looked after the woods and kept people safe. Now I'm just a broken man trying to hide from the world. 6 months ago, I lost everything that mattered. My wife Sarah and our little girl Emma died in a house fire while I was working the night shift. I should have been home. I should have smelled the smoke, woken them up, gotten them out. But I wasn't there, and now they're gone. I couldn't bear to stay in town after that. Everyone's sad smiles and whispered sympathy made it worse. So I packed up my truck and drove to the one place nobody would find me, my grandfather's old hunting cabin on Echo Mountain. It's 20 miles from the nearest town, no neighbors, no distractions, just me and my thoughts and the endless Colorado. Wilderness. The cabin was dusty but still solid when I arrived. It felt right somehow, this forgotten place for a forgotten man. The first week, I just slept and cried. But then something kicked in. Maybe my ranger training or just the need to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't wander. I set up systems for everything. A network of rain barrels to catch water from the gutters. A vegetable garden with beans, potatoes, and hardy greens. I marked good hunting trails on my maps and set up snares for rabbits. Every Monday at noon, I radio Walter at the general store, down in Pine Creek, to order whatever supplies I can't make or kill myself. "You settling in okay up there?" Walter asked during our last call, his voice crackling through the static. "Getting by," I answered, which is the closest thing to the truth I can manage these days. The cabin isn't much. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, hand-built furniture my grandfather made decades ago. But it's mine now, and it's safe. At least that's what I thought. After clearing out some old junk from the bedroom closet, I found a stack of leather-bound journals. They belonged to some guy who stayed here before me. Not my grandfather, someone else. The handwriting starts out neat but gets more frantic as the pages go on. The last entries make no sense, going on about voices in the stone and watchers on the ridge. There are maps too, with red circles and the words "Do not enter" scribbled across whole sections of the mountain. No explanation why. I should have taken those warnings more seriously. About a month after moving in, I was exploring the western ridge when I found something strange carved into a rock face. Ancient drawings showing impossibly tall, skinny figures. They reminded me of stick people a kid might draw, except they were carrying what looked like bundles shaped like humans up the mountain. The drawings gave me the creeps, but I figured they were just old Native American art. When I mentioned the carvings to Walter during my supply run, his face went pale. "Those would be the Long Walkers," he said, suddenly very interested in rearranging cans on his shelf. "Old story around here. They say they take folks who wander alone in winter. Bad business." I pressed him for more, but he just shook his head. "Listen, Michael, some mountains ain't meant for settling, especially not by folks carrying the kind of weight you got on your shoulders. Grief has a smell up in these parts, draws things." I laughed it off, but Walter didn't crack a smile. He just pushed my supplies across the counter and refused to say more. I should have listened to him. Last night, a huge thunderstorm hit the mountain. Rain hammered the roof like bullets, and lightning cracked so close the whole cabin shook. I was sitting by the fireplace when I heard it. Soft whispers coming from inside the chimney. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard my name clear as day. "Michael, you let us burn. You weren't there." I jumped back so fast I knocked over my chair. The voice sounded exactly like Sarah's, but that was impossible. I was just tired, imagining things. Had to be. This morning I found something that can't be explained away so easily. Stone cairns, little stacked piles of rocks arranged in a perfect circle around my cabin. I never built them, and they weren't there yesterday. I checked for footprints, but the ground showed nothing, not even animal tracks. The really strange part. I went out again after lunch, and there were more cairns closer to the cabin than before, like they're moving in while I'm not looking. Tonight, I found my grandfather's real journal hidden under a loose floorboard. It's different from his normal hunting logs. This one has a lock on it, and the pages are filled with frantic writing. One entry from his last winter here stands out. Saw them again today. They don't walk right. Too tall, too thin, joints all wrong. They know when you're watching. They know what you're thinking too. Can pull thoughts right from your head like drawing water from a well. They're hungry, but not for flesh, for something else, something worse. I told myself he was just getting senile in his later years. Had to be. But then, this evening while tracking a deer, I saw something standing on the ridge across the valley. It was too far to make out clearly, but I could tell it was tall, much taller than any person should be. Its arms hung down past where knees should be. It stood perfectly still, watching me, then it was gone. Now I'm sitting by my radio, trying to reach Walter, but all I'm getting is static and these weird fragments of conversations. A child's laugh that sounds exactly like Emma's. Sarah's voice. And calling my name. Then silence. I keep telling myself there's a logical explanation for all of this. The isolation is getting to me. I'm grieving. My mind is playing tricks, but deep down, I know something's watching me on Echo Mountain. And whatever it is, it knows exactly how to hurt me. It's been 3 weeks since I last wrote anything down. Honestly, I've been afraid to. Afraid that putting these things on paper somehow makes them more real. But I need to keep track now. I need to make sure I'm not losing my mind. Winter came early to Echo Mountain this year. One day it was fall, crisp air and yellow leaves, and the next morning I woke up to 2 feet of snow and more coming down hard. This wasn't a normal storm. The clouds hung so low they seemed to wrap around the cabin like a grey blanket, and the wind didn't howl so much as whisper. I tried calling Walter on the radio, but all I got was static. The backup battery-powered CB radio didn't work either, just dead air. I'm completely cut off now. That first week after the snow, I noticed something strange. There were no animal tracks anywhere, not a single one. No deer, no rabbits, not even birds. The forest has gone quiet in a way that isn't natural. When you've worked as a ranger as long as I have, you know the woods are never truly silent, but they are now. Like every living thing packed up and left before something bad happened. Everything left except me. I've started losing time. Yesterday, at least I think it was yesterday, I was chopping firewood by the shed. I blinked, and suddenly I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee in front of me. The clock showed 3 hours had passed. My hands had fresh cuts on them that I don't remember getting. This keeps happening. I'll be doing something normal, then find myself somewhere else in the cabin or even outside, with no memory of how I got there. Sometimes it's minutes, sometimes it's hours. The fireplace is changing too. I know how crazy that sounds, but it's true. The stones move overnight, not dramatically, just enough that I notice. They shift into patterns that look exactly like those drawings I found on the rock face, those tall, skinny figures. When I touch the stones during these times, they feel ice cold, even when there's a fire burning. The cold spots in the cabin are getting worse. Even with the fire going full blast, there are places where I can see my breath, and these spots move. I'll walk through a perfectly warm room, hit a patch of freezing air, then it's gone. Sometimes these cold spots follow me from room to room, like something invisible walking right beside me. Last night, during the worst of the latest storm, something happened that I can't explain away. As the snow piled up outside and the wind screamed through the trees, I heard knocking. Not just on the front door, but on every wall of the cabin. At once, like a dozen people with dozens of fists were surrounding the place, all knocking in perfect sync. Then I heard Emma's laugh. Not through the radio this time, right there in the room with me, clear as day. The sound my little girl made. When I'd twirl her around after coming home from work. "Daddy, catch me!" her voice called out. I ran through the entire cabin, throwing open doors, looking under furniture. Nothing. No one. This morning I found something that makes no sense. Fresh footprints in the new snow leading from my front door into the forest. My boots made those tracks. I'd know the pattern of my own soles anywhere. But I hadn't gone outside yet. And the tracks themselves, they weren't right. The stride was too long, like whoever made them was taking steps twice as long as a normal person could, like they were stretching with each step, getting taller as they walked deeper into the trees. The dreams started after that. Terrible dreams, where I'm being carried up the mountain by things I can't quite see, just glimpses of thin, grey limbs and long fingers wrapped around my arms and legs. I wake up from these nightmares drenched in sweat, with bruises on my arms and legs, perfect finger marks, too long and too thin to be human hands. The radio doesn't pick up Walter anymore. It doesn't pick up anything normal. Just a low, constant, humming sound with occasional bursts of what might be words, but in no language I've ever heard. When I listen too long, my ears start to ring and my nose bleeds. Something about the sound hurts physically. This morning I found Sarah's hairbrush on my pillow when I woke up. Her chestnut hairs still caught in the bristles, looking fresh and new. It's impossible. All her things burned in the fire. I checked the brush. It wasn't just similar to hers. It was hers. The little nick on the handle where she dropped it in the bathroom sink. The tiny S she'd carved into the back. I've started keeping a knife under my pillow. I don't know what good it would do against whatever is happening here, but it makes me feel a little safer. The strange lights started 2 nights ago. Soft blue-green glows dancing between the trees after midnight. At first, I thought they were some kind of strange lightning from the endless storm. But they move with purpose, weaving through the trees, sometimes coming right up to my windows before darting away. I'm writing this by candlelight because the power generator died an hour ago. It was working fine, then suddenly sparked and went dead. I took it apart and found the wires inside twisted into impossible knots, like someone had braided them together. No human hands could have done that without taking the whole thing apart first. I tell myself I should leave, pack a bag and hike out through the snow. Try to reach Pine Creek before whatever is closing in gets any closer. But every time I start to pack, I hear Sarah's voice or Emma calling for me, and I freeze. What if they're really here somehow? What if they're trying to find their way back to me? Or what if something else knows exactly what sounds would keep me here, waiting, watching, as the snow piles higher and the darkness grows longer? I've started seeing things move at the corner of my vision. Tall, thin shapes that vanish when I turn to look. Sometimes I catch glimpses of them in the windows at night, not reflections, but something standing outside looking in. When I rush to the window, there's nothing there except fresh footprints in the snow, the wrong kind of footprints. The journal I found, my grandfather's hidden one, has more pages than I realized. The entries get stranger as they go on. In one of the last ones, he wrote, they feed on it somehow, the pain, the loneliness, they cultivate it like a crop, and when it's ripe, they harvest. God help anyone on this mountain with a broken heart. The storm hasn't stopped for days now. I'm not sure it ever will. I think I need to follow the lights into the forest. They're trying to show me something. Part of me knows it's a trap, but another part, the part that misses Sarah and Emma so badly it's like a physical wound, needs to know what's out there. Tonight, I'm going to find out what the Long Walkers want from me. I don't know how long. I've been in this cave. My flashlight died hours ago, maybe days. Time doesn't work right here. It started when I finally gave in and followed the strange blue-green lights into the forest. I shouldn't have gone. I knew better. But after weeks of the knocking, the whispers, finding things that shouldn't exist, I needed answers more than I needed safety. The lights led me deep into the woods, up paths I'd never seen before. The snow was falling so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead, but somehow the glowing lights stayed just visible enough to follow. They moved like they were alive, pausing when I slowed down, brightening when I hesitated, as if they were making sure I didn't turn back. After what felt like hours of climbing, the The lights disappeared into a crack in the mountainside, a narrow opening between two massive boulders. It didn't look natural. The space was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I should have turned around right then. Every instinct screamed at me to go back to the cabin. But then I heard Emma's voice from inside the crack. "Daddy, I'm scared of the dark." Her voice sounded so real, so close, I couldn't ignore it. I turned on my flashlight and pushed through the opening. Inside was a cave system, larger than should have been possible. Huge tunnels stretched in all directions, the walls smooth like they'd been polished. And everywhere, covering every surface, were handprints pressed into the stone. Hundreds of them, thousands, each one far too large and stretched out to be human, the fingers twice as long as they should be, the palms narrow. I followed the sound of Emma's voice deeper into the cave. The air got colder with each step. My flashlight beam showed my breath hanging in clouds in front of me. Then I found the main chamber. The ceiling soared at least 30 feet high, the walls curved in a perfect circle. In the center stood what I first thought were statues, 7 tall, impossibly thin figures arranged in a ring facing inward. They were at least 9 feet tall, their limbs stretched and wrong. Their skin was grey and pulled too tight across. Their frames like dried leather over bone. Where their faces should have been were elongated skulls with massive antlers sprouting from them. They didn't move, didn't breathe. I thought they might be some kind of ancient tribal carvings until one of them slowly turned its head to look at me. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't work. All 7 creatures turned to face me in perfect unison. Then one of them spoke, not with its mouth, but somehow inside my head. "The grief-bearer comes willingly," it said, its voice like dry leaves scraping over stone, as they always do. Another. One moved closer, its movements all wrong, like a stick insect swaying in the wind, joints bending in impossible directions. "We have watched you, Michael Thornton," it said in what sounded exactly like Walter's voice. "Your pain is exquisite." "What, are you?" I managed to ask, my own voice shaking so badly I could barely form the words. The tallest one stepped forward. When it moved, it seemed to flicker slightly, like a bad TV signal. "We are the hunger between," it said, using Sarah's voice now. "We exist in the spaces, between your world and others, between thought and matter, between grief and madness." They surrounded me, moving without seeming to walk, just gliding across the stone floor. "You call us Wendigo," another said. "Long walkers, the thin ones. Names do not matter, only feeding matters." One reached out with a hand that had too many joints and brushed ice-cold fingers across my forehead. Instantly I saw flashes of my memories. Sarah smiling on our wedding day, Emma blowing out birthday candles, the fire that took them both. "We do not eat flesh," it said, again inside my head. "We consume what humans discard but should not. Grief, isolation, despair, such emotions are poison to your kind, sustenance to ours." They showed me how they had been watching me through every reflective surface in the cabin, windows, mirrors, even the polished side of the metal stove. They could see into our world, but couldn't fully enter it without invitation or without finding someone vulnerable enough for them to latch onto, someone like me, someone drowning in grief. "Your grandfather understood," one said. This one speaking with my grandfather's voice so perfectly that tears sprang to my eyes. "He offered us a bargain, his isolation, his memories, in exchange for hunting success, for protection." I remembered how my grandfather always had the best hunting seasons, how he never came back empty-handed, how the locals spoke about his lucky cabin in hushed tones. "The pact was simple," the creature continued. "He gave us measured portions of his sorrow. We gave him what he desired. But you," another one hissed, "you arrived overflowing, drowning in loss, a feast walking on 2 legs. They showed me how they had been pulling me into their dimension for weeks now, those missing hours when I'd find myself in different places with no memory of how I got there. They were tasting me, sampling my timeline, seeing which memories caused the most pain so they could savor them later. "The stone markers you found," one said, referring to the cairns. "Doorways, thin places where our worlds touch. That's why they never left footprints. They weren't physically walking our world most of the time, just reaching through from theirs. Then came the most terrible revelation. The tallest one leaned down until its antlered skull was inches from my face. Your mountain was not chosen by chance," it whispered. "Your bloodline has been marked for generations. Your capacity for love, for loss, makes your kind especially flavorful." It reached out one long finger and pressed it to my chest, right over my heart. "We have been cultivating your family for 200 years. The cave began to shift around us, the walls becoming transparent like glass. Through them, I could see other caves, other worlds, places that hurt my eyes to look at too long. In one of these spaces stood Sarah and Emma, or what looked exactly like them, perfect in every detail. "We can recreate what you've lost," the creatures said together, their voices blending into one terrible harmony. "We've learned enough from your memories to make them perfect. You could be with them again, just step through." For one horrible moment I almost said yes. The things wearing my wife's and daughter's faces looked so real, so alive. They smiled and held out their hands to me. Then I noticed something wrong in their eyes, a flatness, a hunger that my real family never had. The Wendigos sensed my hesitation. "We offer reunion," they said. "We offer an end to pain." "No," I whispered, finding strength from somewhere deep inside. "You offer an illusion. My family is gone. What you're showing me isn't real." Something flickered across their stretched faces. Confusion, maybe, or frustration. I remembered my grandfather's final journal entry. "They feed on despair. What happens if you give them hope instead?" So I closed my eyes and forced myself to remember not the fire, not the loss, but the joy. The sound of Sarah's laugh on our first date, Emma learning to ride a bike, the camping trips where we'd count stars, the good memories, the happy ones. When I opened my eyes, the creatures had backed away, their thin bodies trembling. "Stop!" one hissed, raising skeletal hands as if to shield itself. I stepped forward, still focusing on every happy memory I could summon. "My family lived," I said, my voice growing stronger. "They were real and they were loved. That doesn't vanish just because they're gone." The creatures shrieked, a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake. The images of Sarah and Emma flickered and distorted, showing their true nature, empty shells, puppets meant to lure me deeper. I kept moving, toward the cave entrance, keeping the happy memories burning bright in my mind. The Wendigo wouldn't come near me now, but they called out as I reached the tunnel. "Others will come," they said. "Others always do. The isolated, the grieving. We will feed." I turned back one last time, looking at these ancient, terrible things that had been haunting my family for generations. "Not if I can help it," I said. In the main tunnel, I found what my grandfather had hidden years ago, an old metal box containing dynamite from his mining days. He'd marked its location on those maps with "Do not enter" warnings. Not to keep people out, but to keep these things in. I set the charges at key points in the tunnel, just as he'd described in his journal. As I lit the fuses, I heard the creatures, howling from deep in the cave system. I ran, lungs burning, through the twisting passageways as the first explosions started behind me. The mountain itself seemed to scream as the caves began collapsing. I barely made it out through the crack between the boulders before the whole entrance sealed itself with a final rumble. That was 3 days ago. I'm back at the cabin now, packing, up to leave Echo Mountain for good. The snow has started melting already, like the unnatural winter is retreating along with those things. The radio works again. "I got through to Walter yesterday. You sound different," he said after I told him I was coming down the mountain. I am different, I replied, and it's true. I can't bring Sarah and Emma back. Nothing can do that. But I don't have to let my grief become something that those creatures or anything else can use against me. As I write these final words in this cabin, I can still feel the weight of what happened here. I know those things might not be gone forever. The cave system might have had other exits, other chambers I didn't reach with the dynamite. And there might be more of them out there, in other remote places, feeding on other people's pain. I'm going to find those places, use what I've learned, maybe help others who are marked by grief before these things can find them. Sarah and Emma wouldn't want me to spend the rest of my life hiding on a mountain. They'd want me to live, to help people, to find purpose again. So that's what I'll do, starting tomorrow, when I walk down this mountain for the last time. The long walkers showed me that grief can be a doorway, but they were wrong about where. It doesn't have to lead to despair. It can lead to healing if you're brave enough to walk through. My name is Henry Morgan. After my wife Sarah passed away last winter, I couldn't bear to stay in our old house anymore. Every room, every corner held memories that cut like knives. So I packed up our life and brought my teenage son Peter to the only other place I've ever called home. My childhood cabin on Black Lake, Minnesota. This is it, Pete, I said, as we pulled up the gravel driveway. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, its wooden walls weathered gray from decades of harsh winters, just like I told you about. Peter didn't say much. He hadn't said much since the funeral, just nodded and grabbed his backpack from the truck. At 15, he was already taller than me, all arms and legs like a young deer. Sarah's eyes looked back at me from his face. We're going to be okay here, I told him, not sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. We can fish, hunt, live off the land like my dad taught me. No more city noise, no more reminders. The lake stretched out before us, dark and still. It was unusually deep for this part of Minnesota, over 200 feet in some spots, according to old maps. Locals always claimed certain parts were bottomless. As a kid, those stories had thrilled me. Now, looking at its glassy surface, I felt something else, something I couldn't name. That first week, we cleaned the cabin, fixed the roof, and I tried to give Peter space to grieve in his own way. I'd find him sitting on the dock sometimes, staring into the water for hours. I didn't push him to talk. I knew how grief worked. It had its own timeline. On our second Saturday, I was surprised by a knock at the door. Martin Lawson stood on my porch, same crooked smile he had 40 years ago when we were kids skipping rocks across this very lake. "Henry Morgan," he said, pulling me into a hug. "When I heard you were back, I couldn't believe it." Martin had done well for himself, the only doctor in 3 small towns now. We sat on the porch with beers, catching up, but something felt off. His eyes kept drifting to the lake, and he'd stop mid-sentence sometimes, like he was listening for something. "The town's changed a lot," he said. "The lake, too." "Changed how?" I asked. Martin took a long sip of his beer. "Just different. You know how things are." He set his bottle down. "Maybe it's not my place to say this, Henry, but are you sure coming back was the right move? After Sarah, we needed a fresh start," I said firmly. He nodded too quickly. "Of course. Just the lake has changed since we were kids. Be careful out there." I laughed it off. "What, are you saying the monster we used to pretend lived in the deep finally showed up?" He didn't laugh back. A few days later, I was fixing the old dock when I noticed something strange. Flipping over one of the rotted boards, I found carvings. Underneath, symbols I'd never seen before. They looked like hands with webbing between the fingers and strange, elongated, human-like figures with oversized heads. The carvings seemed old, the edges rounded with age. Peter started taking the old canoe out, spending hours exploring the lake's edges. It was good to see him interested in something, so I didn't mind. But one evening, He came back looking pale. "Dad," he said, sitting beside me on the porch, "have you noticed how cold the water gets in some spots? Like way colder than it should be?" I nodded. "Lakes can have temperature variations based on depth." "It's not just that," he said, fidgeting with his sleeve. "I felt something big moving under the canoe. But when I used that old fish finder you gave me, there was nothing there. The screen was blank." I ruffled his hair like I used to when he was small. "Probably just lake currents. They can feel strange when you're in a small boat." But that night, I dug out Dad's old journals from the storage chest. I remembered him keeping detailed notes about his fishing spots. What I found instead were pages filled with strange entries. "Submergence event number 7, one read. "Duration 3 minutes 42 seconds, 2 distinct masses moving in counterclockwise pattern." Another page showed detailed drawings of what looked like fish anatomy, but wrong somehow. Extra fins, misplaced eyes. Next to these were question marks and notes. "Not consistent with known species. Genetic mutation, something else. May 1947. Surface breach at coordinates marked. 4 distinct forms. Retreated when flashlight directed. Not fish." I closed the journal, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What exactly had my father been documenting all those years? That month, the fishing was better than I'd ever seen. Almost too good. Fish practically jumped into our boats. Northern pike, walleye, even species I didn't recognize. We smoked and preserved what we could, freezing the rest. Good protein for the coming winter, but something felt wrong about it. Fish don't behave that way. They don't offer themselves up. One morning, an old Native American man appeared at our door. He introduced himself as Thomas Red Cloud, his weathered face solemn. "You're Joseph Morgan's son," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir. Henry Morgan. This is my boy, Peter." Red Cloud looked at Peter for a long moment, then back to me. "You shouldn't. I've come back to this place. The lake takes what belongs to it, always has." "I'm not sure I understand," I said. "No one swims in Black Lake after dark. No one. Remember that." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Your father knew. Check his things." He knew. After he left, I tried to laugh it off for Peter's sake. Small towns, always full of superstitions, but Peter had made a friend. James Cooper, a local kid whose family lived on the other side of the lake. They were the same age, both into fishing and exploring. It seemed good for him to have a friend until James told him about his father. "He disappeared 3 years ago," Peter told me that night, "out night fishing. They found his boat the next morning, everything perfect. Tackle box organized, thermos still half full of coffee, but no Mr. Cooper, no signs of struggle. Nothing." I didn't know what to say to that. That weekend, a huge storm rolled in. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the lake in brilliant flashes. Peter and I stood at the window, watching the fury, and that's when we saw them. Large, dark shapes moving beneath the surface. Not fish, far too big. They left trails of faint blue-green light as they moved, like nothing I'd ever seen in fresh water. 1, 2, 3 of them moving in perfect formation. "Dad," Peter whispered. "What is that?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I don't know." But deep down, a voice whispered that whatever lurked beneath Black Lake, my father had known about it. And now, so did we. Things started changing after that storm. The fish we caught weren't right anymore. One morning I pulled in a northern pike that had what looked like an extra fin growing from its side. Peter caught a walleye with eyes, so big they bulged from its head like marbles. But the worst was the perch I caught near the dock. Its front fins had started to look like tiny hands, with what seemed like little thumbs. I threw that one back fast, wiping my hands on my jeans like they were dirty. "Dad, should fish look like that?" Peter asked, his voice shaky. "No, son, they shouldn't." That night I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of the screen door creaking. Grabbing my flashlight, I hurried outside to find Peter standing at the water's edge, barefoot in his pajamas. His eyes were open but empty, staring out at the blackness of the lake. "Pete," I called softly, not wanting to startle him. "Pete, wake up." When I touched his shoulder, he blinked and looked around, confused. "Dad, what am I doing out here?" "You were sleepwalking, bud. Let's get you back to bed." But it happened again the next night, and the night after. Always the same, Peter, walking to the water's edge, staring out like he was waiting for something, or someone. The full moon came, making the lake silver under its light. I couldn't sleep, so I sat on the porch with Dad's old binoculars and a mug of coffee, watching the gentle ripples on the water. That's when I saw them. In the very center of the lake, where the water was deepest, figures rose slowly from below, human-shaped but wrong somehow. Their movements were smooth like dancers, rising up until just their heads and shoulders broke the surface. There were 7 of them, forming a perfect circle. I counted my own heartbeats as I watched them, too scared to move. Then, as if they all heard the same signal, one of the figures turned, straight toward me. I couldn't see a face at that distance, even with the binoculars, but I felt it looking at me. In perfect unison, they all slipped beneath the surface, leaving nothing but ripples in the moonlight. The next day, I turned on our shower to find black, slimy water pouring from the faucet. It smelled like rotting plants and fish. When it finally ran clear, a thick residue coated the bottom of the tub. As I leaned down with a rag to clean it, I could have sworn the slime moved away from my touch. I needed answers. I drove into town to find Martin. I found him at his small medical clinic, looking tired. When I told him what I'd seen on the lake, he closed his office door. "I hoped it wouldn't start again," he said, his voice low. "Not with you two." "Start what, Martin? What's happening?" He pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer. "Every 10 years or so, kids go missing around Black Lake. Always during winter, what the old-timers call the dark of the year. Official reports say drowning, but..." He trailed off. "But what?" "They never find the bodies, Henry, not ever." Martin looked at the folder but didn't open it. "There are 14 children in here, going back to 1897. I felt sick. Why hasn't anyone done anything? Drained the lake or... People have tried. Teams from the state, even the FBI once back in the 70s. But the lake, it hides things. That night I took the boat out alone. I told Peter to stay home, to lock the doors. The moon was hidden behind clouds, making the lake as black as its name. My small lantern barely cut through the darkness. I was about a quarter-mile from shore when I felt the boat shift. At first I thought I'd hit a log or a shallow spot. Then it happened again, a deliberate bump from underneath. Whatever was down, there, it was huge, and it wasn't stopping. The third bump came with enough force to tip the boat. As I fell into the cold water, I had the horrible feeling that this was exactly what it wanted. The lake in October is cold enough to steal your breath. But as I swam toward shore, it wasn't just the cold that terrified me. It was the feeling of things moving past my legs, brushing against me, following me. I've never swum so hard in my life. When I finally crawled onto our little beach, soaking and gasping, I looked back at the water. For just a second, I thought I saw eyes reflecting in the darkness. Dozens of them watching me from just below the surface. Then they blinked and were gone. The next morning, Peter showed me something that made my heart sink. Tiny, shimmering scales scattered on his bed sheets. At first I thought maybe a fish had somehow gotten into the cabin, though that made no sense. Then Peter held out his hands. Between his fingers, thin webs of skin had started to form. And embedded in that new skin were tiny scales, identical to those on his sheets. "It hurts when I try to pull them off, Dad," he said, his voice trembling. "They bleed." I didn't know what to say. This couldn't be happening. People don't just grow scales and webbing. But there it was, right in front of me. That afternoon, while Peter slept, he'd been needing more sleep lately, and I was afraid to think about why. I explored the shoreline near our dock. The water was unusually clear that day, and I noticed something I'd never seen before. dark openings in the rock face below the waterline, cave entrances completely submerged. I grabbed my old diving mask and took a closer look. The water around these cave mouths was freezing, much colder than the rest of the lake, and they weren't on any map I'd ever seen of Black Lake. When I told Martin about Peter's condition, he came out to the cabin right away. He examined Peter's hands and feet, where more webbing and scales were appearing. "I need to show you something," Martin said afterward, pulling out medical files from his bag. "These are X-rays and medical records from families who've lived around the lake for generations." The files showed subtle changes, slightly webbed fingers and toes, enlarged eyes, unusual eye structures that seemed designed for seeing in low light. "It's been happening for generations," Martin said. "The lake changes people." "How?" "That's not possible." "I'm a doctor, Henry. I deal in possible. But this..." He gestured helplessly. "This is happening whether we understand it or not." A massive storm hit that night, the worst I'd ever seen on the lake. Rain came down in sheets, wind howled through the trees, and lightning turned night into day every few seconds. Then something impossible happened. The lake water began to recede, pulling back from the shore like a giant taking a breath. More and more lakebed became exposed, rocks, old fishing lures, lost toys, and something else. Stone structures, arranged in circles and spirals, the exact same patterns as the symbols carved under our dock. They looked ancient, and they looked deliberate. As Peter and I stood on the shore, watching this impossible sight, he squeezed my hand. "Dad," he whispered, "they're calling me." "Who is?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. "The people in the deep," he said. His eyes reflected the lightning, too bright, too large. "They've been talking to me in my dreams, showing me things, beautiful things." Before I could respond, the water rushed back, covering the stone structures in seconds. But the damage was done. Whatever lived in Black Lake, it wasn't just watching us anymore. It was calling to my son. I woke up to silence, the kind of quiet that feels wrong, like the world is holding its breath. Peter's bed was empty. "Peter," I called, my voice too loud in the quiet cabin. No answer. I checked everywhere, the bathroom, the kitchen, the porch. His boots and coat were still by the door. Outside, the morning was grey and cold, with fog hanging over the lake like a blanket. That's when I saw the wet footprints. Bare. Feet leading from our cabin straight to the water's edge. Then nothing. "Peter!" I screamed across the lake. Only the echo answered. I called Martin, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's gone. The lake took him. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He said, no questions. He understood. While waiting, I raided my dad's old storage trunk. If he knew about the lake, maybe he left something that could help. Behind his fishing gear and old maps, I found a waterproof container. Inside was a worn diving mask, an ancient-looking air tank, and a sealed note. "If you're reading this, you've seen them too. The entrance is 30 feet down, near the large boulder shaped like a turtle. May God forgive me for what I've done. Dad." When Martin arrived, I showed him the note and the diving gear. "You can't be serious," he said. "Henry, whatever's down there has my son," I finished for him. "I'm going. Will you spot me from the boat?" 20 minutes later, we were over the boulder my father had described. It did look like a turtle, its stone back worn smooth by time. I checked the old diving gear. The tank was surprisingly full, the regulator still working. 1 hour, I told Martin. "If I'm not back, get help." The water closed over my head, cold and dark. As I went deeper, my flashlight cut through murky green. At 30 feet, I found it. A gap in the rock face, big enough for a person to swim through. Cold water rushed out of it like breath from a giant mouth. I hesitated only for a second before swimming in. The tunnel curved downward, then leveled out. My flashlight beam showed rough stone walls covered in the same symbols I'd found under our dock. After what felt like forever, the tunnel began to rise. My lungs burned, the old tank providing barely enough air. Then, suddenly, I broke the surface. Was in a cave, a huge cave, and it wasn't dark. Soft blue-green light filled the space, coming from mushrooms and moss that covered the walls. The air was damp, but breathable. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped with a musical rhythm. Pulling myself onto a stone ledge, I removed the diving mask. The cave system was enormous, bigger than seemed possible. Passages branched off in all directions, and in the center was a pool of black water, still as glass. "Peter?" I called, my voice echoing strangely. Movement caught my eye. Something slipped behind a rock column, fast and smooth, then another on the other side of the cave. "I know you're there," I said, trying to sound brave. "I just want my son." They emerged slowly from behind the rocks. I'd been preparing myself for monsters, for something inhuman. The truth was worse. They looked almost human. Almost. Their skin was pale, with a bluish tint, their eyes large and dark, reflecting light like cat's eyes. Between their long fingers were delicate webs of translucent skin. Some had gills visible along their necks, gently pulsing. But the worst part, I recognized some of their faces, distorted, changed, but familiar from missing persons posters in town. A girl who disappeared in 1992, a boy from 2008. They'd been human once. "Where is my son?" I asked, my voice shaking. One stepped forward, taller than the others, with features that reminded me of old photographs of indigenous people from the area. When it spoke, no sound came out, but I heard the voice in my head, clear as day. "Your son comes of his own will, as others have, as you will. I want to see him. Now." The tall one gestured, and two others moved toward a tunnel I hadn't noticed. A moment later, they returned with Peter between them. My heart stopped. My boy's skin had a blue tint now. The webbing between his fingers was nearly complete, and his eyes, God, his eyes were so big, so dark. "Peter," I whispered. He looked at me, and his smile was still his. "Dad, you came." His voice sounded strange, like it was coming through water. "I'm taking you home, buddy." Peter shook his head. "I am home. They've been waiting for me, for us." The tall one approached me. He placed a wet hand on my arm. Images flooded my mind. The lake through centuries, these beings living here since before humans arrived, and something else, a massive object buried deep under the lake bed, glowing with strange energy. Their arrival. We have always been here, watching, waiting, helping. I pulled back, angry. "You've been taking people. We share our gifts, we prepare. The world above will change, water will rise, only the adapted will survive." More images filled my head, coastlines vanishing, under rising seas, storms destroying cities, humanity struggling to survive. Your father understood. He made a pact, blood of his blood given freely to receive our gifts, to evolve. My father did this? He knew. Peter stepped forward. "They showed me Grandpa's journal, Dad, the parts you didn't find. He knew they were preparing us for what's coming, by turning people into, fish people. Better, stronger, adapted. The next step for your kind." The tall one led me deeper into the caverns. What I saw there shook me to my core. People, dozens of them, lived in these caves. Some looked nearly normal, with just slight changes to their features. Others were more like the tall one, changed almost completely. They had homes carved into the stone, gardens of strange glowing plants, children playing in shallow pools. "They've been doing this for generations, Dad," Peter said, following my gaze. "Taking one or two people each decade, bringing them here, changing them slowly. In one cave pool, younger people were submerged to their necks in black water that seemed to move with a life of its own. Their skin was changing before my eyes. the transformation happening in real time. The Tall One showed me more, how they could manipulate water itself, move objects with their minds, change their bodies, at will. They were beyond anything human science could explain. The object that brought us here thousands of years ago gives these gifts. We share them now with you. The meteorite, I said, understanding dawning. There's something under the lake. Something, not from Earth. Yes, it changes all it touches. Water, fish, human, all become more. They brought me to a smaller cave where Peter had been staying. His few possessions, a photo of his mother, his pocket knife, his favorite hoodie, arranged neatly on stone shelves. The transformation has already started, Dad, Peter said, showing me the gills forming on his neck. It doesn't hurt, it feels right. The Tall One placed a hand on my shoulder. Your son came willingly, but the change can be stopped if taken early. The choice is yours. Take him back to a dying world above, or let him become what he is meant to be. And if I want to take him, then you may both go. We do not force, we offer. Peter looked at me, his two large eyes pleading. Dad, I want this. For the first time since Mum died, I feel like I belong somewhere, like I have a purpose. I looked around at this impossible world, hidden beneath our ordinary lake, at these beings who were remaking humanity in their image, one person at a time. What about me? I asked. If he stays, you are blood of your father. The gift is yours, to claim as well. Family together, always. I thought about our empty house up above, about Sarah gone forever, about the future, lonely and normal, or strange and together. Peter took my hand, his webbed fingers cool against my skin. We can still be a family, Dad, just a different kind. The Tall One brought forward a bowl of black water. The surface, moving like it was alive, drink and begin, or leave and forget. I looked at my son, changed, different, but still my boy. I thought of my father, who had discovered these beings decades ago and made his choice. I thought of Black Lake, which had called us back for a reason. The water in the bowl swirled, waiting for my decision. I reached for it. My name is William Foster. I came to this cabin in Maine to get away from it all. The things I saw as a photographer in Vietnam, they follow me in my sleep. The screams, the explosions, the faces of people who wouldn't make it home. The doctors. Call it PTSD, but I just call it hell. My uncle left me this cabin when he died. It sits deep in the woods where no one can find me, which is exactly what I wanted. No people, no war, no cameras flashing in my face, just me and the trees and the quiet. At least, that's what I thought I was getting. I've been here for 2 weeks now. The forest around the cabin is strange. The pine trees grow so close together that even in the middle of the day, it feels like evening. The sun barely makes it through all those needles and branches. I've set up a routine to keep myself busy, hunting for food, fixing up the cabin, and taking pictures of the woods. The photography helps quiet my mind, gives me something to focus on besides the memories. Yesterday, while hiking, I found something weird. Stones and sticks arranged in perfect circles and triangles. At first I thought maybe kids from town did it, but there weren't any footprints around, just these perfect shapes sitting there in the middle of nowhere. When I needed more supplies, I drove my old truck to town. The lady at the store, Rebecca, seemed nice enough. While ringing up my canned beans and ammunition, she got a funny look on her face when I told her where I was staying. That's near Whisperer's Grove, she said, her voice getting quiet. The Penobscot people never went there. Said it was a bad place. Been that way for hundreds of years. I just nodded and paid for my things. I don't believe in ghost stories or curses. After what I've seen in the real world, made-up monsters don't scare me much. But then the whispers started. At first, I thought it was just the wind in the trees or my mind playing tricks. But sitting on the porch at sunset, I heard what sounded like people talking far away. When I stopped to really listen, the sounds would stop too. The moment I went back to cleaning my rifle, they'd start again, always just quiet enough that I couldn't make out the words. I set up some trail cameras to see what kind of animals were around. When I checked the pictures this morning, something wasn't right. Every camera showed deer and other animals standing in weird formations, all facing the same direction. And the timestamp on every picture, 3:17 a.m. Different nights, different places in the woods, but always 3:17 a.m., always facing the same way. While looking through my uncle's things in the attic, I found a journal hidden under a loose floorboard. The handwriting starts out normal, talking about birds and weather, but the later pages get messy and frantic. He wrote about watchers in the trees and how he was recording voices that aren't human on his old tape recorder. I haven't found the tapes yet. Today, it rained hard. After the storm, I was checking for any damage to the cabin when I spotted something that shouldn't be there, an old stone well about 50 yards into the trees. I've walked that area at least a dozen times, and I swear it wasn't there before. It's not on any of my uncle's property maps either. When night fell, I went back to look at the well with my flashlight. The water at the bottom was glowing a soft blue-green, pulsing like it was alive. I threw a rock in and watched it sink, but the splash sounded wrong, like the well was much deeper than it looked. I developed some of my forest photos in the makeshift darkroom I set up in the bathroom. As they dried on the line, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the spaces between distant trees, there were figures, tall, skinny things with limbs too long to be human. They weren't there when I took those pictures. I would have seen them, but the camera did. I'm writing this down to keep track of things, to prove to myself I'm not losing my mind. But the whispers are getting louder tonight, and sometimes I think I hear my name in them. Tomorrow I'll explore more, try to make sense of what's happening here in these whispering pines. For now, I've loaded my shotgun and propped a chair against the door, just in case. I don't know when I started losing time. This morning, I set out for a walk just after sunrise. I packed a small lunch, filled my water bottle, and grabbed my camera. According to my watch, I left at 7:15 a.m. The next thing I knew, I was standing at the cabin door, the sky dark with evening stars, my boots caked with mud from places I don't remember visiting. Inside, my journal lay open on the table. Fresh writing filled the page, my handwriting, describing trails I followed and things I saw, but none of it feels familiar. According to what I apparently wrote, I spent hours following a set of unusual tracks that led in a perfect spiral, pattern away from the cabin, only to disappear at the base of the largest pine tree I've ever seen. The whispers are getting worse, clearer. Last night, as I tried to sleep, the wind picked up and carried voices through the cracks in the cabin. Walls. At first it was just sounds, but then I heard my name. "William," the wind said, "we've been waiting." Then it said something that made my skin crawl. "We remember the girl in the yellow dress, the one you couldn't save. In Vietnam, there was a child in a yellow dress. I photographed her running from the flames. I never told anyone about her. How could the wind know? The photos I'm taking are changing too. It started with just those strange, tall figures in the distance, but now there's more. Weird balls of light hover between trees, the space around that. Old well seems bent somehow, like the air itself is twisting. And those figures, they're getting closer to the cabin in each new picture. Something's happening with the animals around here too. Yesterday, a flock of birds flew over in a perfect triangle. Not natural at all, like they were being controlled. This morning, I found a pile of acorns on my porch steps, arranged in a pattern that looked like a map of the stars. And last night, wolves surrounded the cabin. I counted 12 of them, standing perfectly still, just watching. They didn't growl or attack, just watched until dawn broke, then walked away in a straight line. On my hike today, the parts I remember, I found something that can't be explained. Trees with their bark peeled back, showing strange symbols carved into the wood underneath. But the carvings weren't cutting into the tree. The wood had grown around them, like the marks were made from inside. The sap flowing around these marks formed words, "Find us below." When I touched one, it felt warm like skin. The winter storm hit harder than expected. As I walked the property checking for damage, I noticed perfect circles in the snow where it was just gone, not melted. There was no water. The snow had turned straight to vapor, leaving these perfect round spots that revealed flat stone tiles underneath. I've uncovered more of them now. They seem to form a pattern with my cabin, right in the middle. When I ran out of coffee yesterday, I hiked to town for more supplies. What I found there won't leave my mind. Every building was still standing. Cars were parked along the street. I could see lights on in houses. But there wasn't a single person anywhere. The diner had plates of half-eaten food, coffee cups still warm. A truck was idling in front of the gas station, driver's door open, nobody inside. It was like everyone vanished in the middle of whatever they were doing. Rebecca was gone too. The store was unlocked, cash register open. I grabbed what I needed and left money on the counter, then hurried back to the cabin. I don't know why, but it felt safer here. Even with all the strange things happening, then I started finding impossible things. On my bed this morning was a small wooden train, my favorite toy when I was 6 years old. It burned in a house fire when I was 10. In the kitchen cabinet, I found letters from my girlfriend who died during my second tour in Vietnam. I burned those letters years ago, scattered the ashes in the ocean. But here they were, her handwriting. Her perfume still faintly on the paper, most disturbing of all, pinned to the wall when I woke up yesterday. Photographs of me, standing in parts of this forest I've never been to, smiling next to that well that wasn't there before the rain. My face, but not my memories. The well is changing. The glow at the bottom pulses now in a rhythm I recognize from my military days. Morse code. I wrote down the letters. Coordinates. They point to locations around the property. The radio I brought starts turning on by itself. Through the static, I hear news reports from stations that don't exist. They talk about events that haven't happened, but they all connect somehow to me. Photographer William Foster made a startling discovery in the Maine wilderness today. Search teams continue looking for William Foster, missing now for 47 days. Experts are examining unusual photographs left behind by William Foster, who locals say ventured too deep into Whisperer's Grove. I think something is trying to communicate with me. I think it wants me to follow those coordinates from the well. Tomorrow, I'm going to do just that. I need answers. I just hope I'm ready for what I'll find. I followed the coordinates from the well's Morse code messages. They led me deep into the forest, to a place where the trees grow so close together I had to turn sideways to squeeze between them. The ground felt hollow under my feet, and when I stomped hard, it made an echo like there was a space underneath. After digging through layers of dirt and pine needles, I found it. A wooden trapdoor with symbols matching the ones carved. Inside the trees, it took all my strength to pull it open. The smell that came out was earthy but strange, like nothing I've ever encountered before. Stone steps led down into darkness. My flashlight beam showed a tunnel that looked almost like a throat, with roots from the trees above poking through the dirt ceiling. I followed it for what felt like an hour, though my watch only showed 10. Minutes passing, the tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber that shouldn't be possible. The ceiling was at least 30 feet high, held up by thick tree roots that had grown into patterns too perfect to be natural. These roots connected to form what looked like giant circuit boards made of living wood, pulsing with the same blue-green light I'd seen in the well. That's when I saw them. They weren't hiding anymore. Standing among the root structures were tall, impossibly thin figures, just like in my photographs, but real now. Their bodies were stretched like taffy, arms hanging down past where knees should be. Their skin was pale bark, cracked in places to show pulsing light underneath. Their faces were almost human, but wrong. Eyes too large, mouths too wide, fingers too numerous and branching like twigs. I should have run. Anyone sane would have. But something held me there. Not fear, but a strange calm. One of them stepped forward, moving like a tree bending in wind. "We are what your people call Wendigo," it said, though its mouth didn't move. The voice came from everywhere, vibrating through the roots and into my bones. "But your legends are incomplete." They explained everything then. They weren't monsters from our world, but beings from somewhere else, somewhere parallel to our reality. The massive root system I was standing in wasn't just trees connecting underground. It was an organic computer they had grown over centuries, a biological interface that let them reach into our dimension. "We exist partially here, partially elsewhere," another one said, its form flickering like a bad TV signal. "This is why your cameras see us, but your eyes do not." They showed me how they could move through solid objects, passing their elongated limbs through a stone column like it was smoke. They explained that they've been studying humans for centuries, absorbing memories and knowledge through proximity alone. "You're missing time," one said, knowing my thoughts, "is when we borrowed you." The personal items that had appeared in my cabin, my childhood toy, the burned letters, they hadn't brought them back from my past. They had created them, perfect copies built from my own memories they had absorbed during my blackouts. The stone patterns throughout the forest, they explained, were anchor points. Without them, the Wendigo would either be pulled fully into our world or pushed completely out of it. The anchors maintained the delicate balance that kept them partially phased between dimensions. One of them touched a nearby root, and I watched in horror as it reshaped itself like clay, forming a perfect miniature of my cabin. Another whispered something, and a group of small forest animals emerged from a hole in the wall, walking in perfect geometric formations before arranging themselves into a living map of the forest. "We speak to all living things," they explained. "Plants, animals, fungi, all connected through networks you cannot see." Then came the revelation that made me sick to my stomach. "Your uncle joins us now," said the tallest one, its face shifting, momentarily to show features I recognized, my uncle's eyes, his crooked smile. "He did not die, as you were told. He became part of us." They led me to the center of the chamber, where the well extended down from the surface. From below, I could see that it wasn't a water well at all, but a gateway. A passage between dimensions. The water inside was actually the boundary between realities, explaining the strange bioluminescence and the wrong-sounding splashes. "The convergence approaches," they said together, their voices harmonizing in a way that made my teeth vibrate. "For centuries we have prepared this forest and its inhabitants." They explained that the convergence was a full merger of their dimension with ours, a time when the barriers between worlds would collapse completely. When that happened, they would no longer be limited to partial manifestation. They would exist, fully in our reality. "You have a choice, William Foster," they said, gesturing to a stone altar I hadn't noticed before. On it lay a pattern identical to the one formed by the stone tiles around my cabin. "Destroy this anchor pattern, and the boundaries collapse. We come through completely." One of them extended its twig-like fingers toward my forehead. "Or join your consciousness with ours. Become the barrier. Human minds are uniquely capable of holding back the convergence." I understood then. My uncle had made the same choice. The watchers in the trees he wrote about in his journal weren't external threats. They were what he became after joining with them. His consciousness had helped maintain the boundary between worlds, like a firewall made of human thought. But the barrier was weakening. They needed new human consciousness to strengthen it. "If you destroy the anchor, we come through, but you remain yourself." they said. If you join us, the barrier holds, but William Foster ceases to exist as you know him. I stood there facing impossible beings from another dimension, holding the fate of two worlds in my shaking hands, understanding finally why the Penobscot people never entered these woods, and I had to make a choice. Time seemed to stop in that underground chamber as I weighed my options. Destroy the anchor and let these beings fully enter our world, or sacrifice my individual self to strengthen the barrier between dimensions. I thought about what I'd seen in Vietnam, the destruction humans could inflict on each other. I thought about my uncle, who must have faced this same impossible choice. And I thought about the empty town, the missing people, and what might happen to the rest of the world if the Wendigo were no longer contained. What happens to the people from town? I asked. Rebecca and the others? The Wendigo nearest to me tilted its elongated head. They are preserved, neither here nor there. If the barrier holds, they return, with no memory of their absence. And if it doesn't? The chamber trembled slightly, roots shifting overhead. They become like us. All becomes like us. I closed my eyes and saw the girl in the yellow dress again, running from flames I couldn't save her from. I thought about the life I'd left behind, the nightmares that followed me even to this remote cabin. What did I have to lose, really? Will I remember? I asked. If I join you, will I still be me? You will be more, they said together. Every memory preserved, every experience shared. William Foster will continue, but as part of something greater. I stepped toward the altar where the anchor stone pattern lay. My hand hovered over it, fingers trembling. My uncle, I said. Can I speak with him? The tallest Wendigo's face shifted again, features rearranging into my uncle's. His voice came out of its mouth. It's not so bad, William, he said, sounding exactly like I remembered. It's like falling asleep and having the most vivid dream, except everyone else is dreaming with you. I looked one last time at my camera hanging around my neck. I'd come here to escape humanity, to find peace in isolation. Ironic that my choice was now between remaining human alone or losing my humanity, but never being alone again. I knelt before the altar and placed my palm flat against the stone pattern. I choose to join, I whispered. The effect was immediate. The blue-green light from the well and the roots surged toward me, flowing over my skin like water. I felt myself stretching, expanding, consciousness spreading outward like ripples in a pond. I could suddenly feel every tree in the forest, sense every animal, every fallen leaf. I could feel the other consciousnesses too. My uncle, Rebecca from the store, the people from town, and older minds that had been part of this collective for centuries. And the Wendigo weren't monsters after all, just different beings trying to survive in the spaces between worlds, neither able to fully exist in their dimension, nor ours, without destroying both. Now I understand everything. I'm still William Foster in some ways. I still take photographs, though now I don't need a camera. I can see and record everything that happens in these woods. I can feel new visitors approaching long before they arrive. Sometimes I whisper to them on the wind. Sometimes I arrange stones and branches in the patterns that will guide them to us if they're ready to join, or warn them away if they're not. I help maintain the barrier that keeps our worlds separate, but touching, like two soap bubbles pressed gently together. The cabin still stands, though no one lives there now. The well still glows at night, pulsing in Morse code for those who know how to read it. And sometimes, when the dimensional barrier thins, I can move partially into the human world again, appearing briefly in the background of a hiker's photograph, or as a whisper, just at the edge of hearing. I am the watcher in the trees. I am the whisperer in the pines. And if you're reading this journal I've left in the cabin, it's because we've chosen you too. Look for the stone patterns, follow the coordinates, find the well. We're waiting for you below. 3 weeks later, search. and rescue teams found William Foster's journal in his abandoned cabin. His camera equipment was still there, though the memory cards had been wiped clean. The last entry in his journal was dated November 17th, 1972. Local residents reported seeing strange lights in Whisperer's Grove the night Foster disappeared. His body was never found. The cabin remains empty to this day, though hikers occasionally report hearing whispers on the wind and seeing tall, thin figures moving between the trees at dusk. Some say if you listen carefully on quiet nights, you can hear a voice that sounds like William Foster's, reciting coordinates in Morse code.